Masato staggers in, drained from relentless overtime at the office, collapses onto the couch every night, haunted by the idea that this grind will define his next 40 years. In his second year, he was deployed to the corporation as its on-site engineer. A crushing workload slammed him into unpaid overtime, chaining him to extra hours without a single cent of pay. At his workplace, ironclad rules clamp down on every move, and the laid-back boss, by refusing to act, cranks the tension up to a fever pitch. One by one, employees crumple from exhaustion, and when they land in the hospital, the boss explodes in rage and slashes their salaries. Off the clock, Masato gets pelted with judgment and cold stares for not having a better job. It was the only company that would hire him, and bit by bit he learned to stare down and survive its brutal demands. Bit by bit, the spark of his purpose sputters out. He found refuge in tending the plants, giving each a gentle splash of water every day, a gardening habit he forged in his first year at the company when everything was falling apart. This is the spark that now propels him to move on. That night, utterly drained after a brutal shift at work, he's glued to a TV commercial as sunlit, grinning farmers swing their tools and haul in mountains of golden crops. Their joy sparks a fire in him, so he turns a corner of his home into a tiny garden to chase that same feeling. His gaze snaps to one fruit, teetering on the verge of ripeness. He locks eyes on a cherry tomato dotted with strange blotches, and curiosity explodes. He has to know what it tastes like. Panic stabbed him. If she was sick, she'd spread infection and ravage his other plants. He lunges, shoves a chunk of tomato into his mouth, and bolts it down. He freezes, hunting for why he'd done it, but his thoughts bleed away and his consciousness slides into numbness. Panic ripped through them. Was it toxic, or would its effects strike instantly? You don't even have time to blink before darkness rips the light away. He snaps his eyes open and realizes he's in a forest. This isn't his home or a hospital. To his right, a glowing status window hovered, brandishing his full name, a new job title, a flood of stats, a list of skills, and a stark note that he'd eaten the fruit of reincarnation. At level 5, every one of his attributes twisted into bizarre, wildly lopsided extremes. His life snapped from office cubicle to plow and pitchfork farm overnight, and he stood there reeling, utterly bewildered. Until a crushing truth hits him, he'd been reborn through that machine. At first, he blames the fruit, convinced it's nothing but a hallucination. He stalked up to the tree and rammed his skull into it, expecting a jolt back to reality. Only white-hot pain flared, so he shrugged it off as a freak coincidence. He rammed his head into tree after tree until a searing pain lit up his skull. And at that white-hot shock, he finally accepted this was reality. He's been ripped from death's clutches and brought back to life. He slammed to a halt as a fist-sized girl blinked into existence right before him, grinning. He crumples to the ground, stunned and wide-eyed, wondering if she's a doll as she soars toward him, laughing with bright, unstoppable joy. She promised she could launch the tree of reincarnation to him before he could even form a reply, and the robotic voice in his head snapped that he had no time to object. I've uncovered the truth. The little girl is a dryhead and she's become my companion. At that moment, a surge of strength exploded through him, like his energy had been restored. Dazed, he snapped to the status window and gaped, stunned at what it showed. Every one of his characteristics quadrupled in an instant, and a fierce, electrifying surge of change rolled through his body. The numbers weren't props, they seared his vision and hit him like a thunderclap. This wasn't a dream or a hallucination, it was a real transformation. At that instant, the druidess anointed him the tree of rebirth and beckoned him to follow. He stammered, cheeks burning, I'm not like that, I only ate a fruit. Like a tomato on death's doorstep. Before he could even react, dryads poured in, drawn by the first dryad's cry and sensing the reincarnation trees zeroing in on him. They surged around him, voices exploding with joy as they greeted him. While his system blasted message after message, each one bragging that he'd reached every dryad in your order. Masada slammed the status window open and froze. The numbers had overflowed into exponents, and he realized he'd tamed exactly 112 dryads. Everyone quadrupled their 5 core stats, and the numbers exploded off the charts. He tore through the calculations in his head, then tossed aside the idea of explaining them. It would be pointless. While everyone scrambles to piece the chaos together, neither he nor anyone else will likely understand what's really happening. Masato shoved it into the hallucination pile for now, flung open his status window, and hunted for any sign of people who could help. He locked onto a flying skill that, thanks to his razor intellect, would blast him into space the moment he activated it. Only 10 mana points throbbed in his core, burning them all could kill him. I see them scramble for a safer approach as a dragon rips open the sky above. His instincts screamed danger, he darted aside. He scraped free from an attack that hurled the dryads apart, and they stood unscathed. Still reeling, Masato's eyes went wide as the dragon lunged straight at him. Jagged, chipped claws screamed the truth. The treacherous attack left it far more wounded than he. A wild plan sparked. He'd commandeer a dragon and soar into human civilization. First, he had to learn to parley with the beast. When the dragon threw back its head, inhaling a furnace of flame for the attack, Masada doubted he could survive, scanned his abilities, and found two: a barrier and a spell rupture. A blazing certainty roared through him. He could snuff the dragon's fiery breath with the powers he already had. With nowhere left to turn, Masato hurled spell break at the dragon. It staggered and unleashed a shocked, earth-shaking roar. The dry head ripped meaning from her stunned, awestruck Masato and declared she could understand the dragon. He turned to us and asked if she could translate for him. Then the moment cracked open with something completely unexpected. He conquered a cutting-edge automatic language translation skill, a game-changing power you absolutely need to learn about. Masato flinched as the dragoness's complaint rolled through him, hissing that the human had cut off her breath attack. Clarity slammed into him. He finally understood her words and realized he could speak to her directly. He shouted, "Can you hear me? Can you understand me?" The dragoness froze, jaw unhinged, disbelief roaring through her as a human suddenly spoke her tongue. A thunderbolt of realization struck Masato. Translation worked both ways, and he slammed his words at the dragon with no delay. He had a request. He implored her to hoist him into the sky. He knew he was no negotiator, so he launched a blunt, direct plea, betting their clear communication would sway her. When she finally confessed, she understood him. The dragon sneered, flat out refusing to grant the plea of a mere mortal. She scoffed at Masato's pleas, spotted another blast of fiery breath hurtling her way, and calmly snuffed it out with a spell that breaks enchantments. He hailed her as noble and demanded she rush to help the needy, but she ignored him outright, silent, unmoving, and slamming the door on any negotiation. He ripped the hunt from Masato, stopping the search for any dragon countering ability. He meant to wield the force for two reasons. At first, he fought back. Even if it fails, the dragon struck first. Ignore it and the city it targets could burn, and all the while the beast was sharpening its skills. He finally tracked down Nanofire, but a cold dread gnawed at him. This was exactly how he'd feared it would be. His ferocious power could incinerate a dragon and reduce an entire forest to ash. He'd always leaned on soft spells, but in this desperate moment he had to unleash something brutal. He slammed Nanofire into action without a second thought. He blasted a colossal pillar of fire straight through the clouds, its molten tip missing the dragon by a heartbeat. The spell's simple name hid a cataclysmic power that sent the dragon reeling. Masato's plan unleashed the mythical last atomic hell. Masato swore he'd only unleashed Nanoflame because his MP was too drained to fuel a stronger spell. The dragon roared, branding him a liar. The words barely landed before Nanofire's gaze locked onto the monstrous scale of the last atomic hell forged without spells. A technique Masato never even knew existed. To feel any resistance here, he had to unleash magic on the level of a complex spell. He spied the fear in her eyes and pounced on the misunderstanding, turning it into his advantage. She screamed that this force, not born of fire, could tear the world apart. Her former pride collapsed, his magic reduced her to a timid, panicked wreck. Masato realized the dragon spoke with unnerving politeness, and though the beast loomed huge and threatening, it suddenly looked pitiful. So long as she could still soar, that was all she needed. He pressed again. "Did you use Skyward?" She didn't miss a beat. She agreed to help without hesitation. He grabbed her wrist, eyes blazing, and warned, "Don't burn yourself out. Conserve every ounce for the long trip ahead." She scoffed and wrote, "I can cross the continent in half a day," and relief crashed over Sato when he realized her speed matched a passenger plane. He vaulted onto her back, clinging like a lifeline as she launched into the sky. When she launched into the sky, he ripped a scale from her by accident. His grip gave out and he crashed to the ground with a sickening thud. The dragon only noticed when the impact screamed into its ears. She gasped a hurried apology for not noticing sooner. Masato's upgraded stats swallowed the pain, a lucky break in a desperate moment, and the dragon mumbled sorry for its trembling scales. Masato screamed for her to stop the bowing before it plowed into the neighboring dryers. His eyes locked onto the scale itself. She plastered on a brave smile and assured him everything was fine because the whole thing was teetering, poised to snap. As an apology, she lunged forward, pressed a shell into his palm and declared, "Humans would pay a fortune for this in their markets." Masato snatched it with a sly grin, already scheming to flip it later. Then unleashed the skill and summoned the activated storage. Rip opened the portal that absorbed the scale and registered it as Crimson Dragon Scale. Then shout item box to pull out the stored items. Masato and the dragon burst free from the forest, charging into the open. He clung to her back as they tore through the sky. He pinned his gaze to the horizon, spotted the scattered farms clinging to the outskirts, and swept the area with a sharp, searching scan. In that heartbeat, a burning conviction seized him. This new world could finally give him the peaceful life he'd always dreamed of. A nameless force slammed into him, intense, undeniable. Sim's gaze locked on the city, and he urged the dragon to hover above it. She refused, snapping that it would be madness, and urged them to land by the city gates. They followed through. Masato flashed a grateful smile for the ride, and she beamed, promising she'd help him anytime. Masato's heart leapt with joy, but the window to contact her had slammed shut. She volunteered to stay with the dragon, and when he demanded if she could still reach others from afar, she snapped back a confident yes. He beamed and waved her to stay, and the other dryads trailed after him, every one of them green and bursting with joy. Masato and the dryads vaulted off, probed the connection, and the dragon rumbled that the message had reached it. She vowed to head home and told Masato to call the instant he needed her. He swore he'd come back to her later and lean on her for help. When she left, he spun toward the nearest city and tore for it, hundreds of dryads thundering in his wake. The dragoness thundered back to her cave, skidded to a halt at the mouth, then, eyes alight from Masato's sky-high daring, beckoned the dryad to watch as she tried her own bold stunt. Light exploded from her claws curling back into human hands as she shrank and became a young girl. She didn't beg someone to dry it. She demanded to know how her magic to become human first burst into being. Masato watched the city guards spiral into panic, stuffing their gear into packs and bracing for death the instant the dragons vanished. Spotting the mix-up, he called out, asked to enter the city, and soothed their doubts with a steady, confident voice. They demanded to see his family's coat of arms. Confusion slammed into him when he asked what a coat of arms was. When he pressed for clarification, the answer hit like a bomb: he wasn't a nobleman. The guards froze, mouths open at his words and the way he'd sent the dragon reeling, dubbing him a noble knight. And Masato guessed his tone must have sounded noble. A jolt of realization hit him. This had to be his automatic language translation skill kicking in. He reforges his polite Japanese into regal, noble speech to fit this world's aristocracy. He slipped into a casual tone, and the guards nodded, convinced he sounded like an ordinary person. Strange, yes, still way better than people calling it talent. He smirked and assured them the dragon wasn't a real threat. One hostile shot spooked it, and it ended up giving him a ride. They floored the guards by turning the dragon into their ride, and the guards' jaws dropped when a single nanofire sent the beast into a panic. They were still clueless, and when Masato asked again how to get to the city, they pressed a ring into his palm. They revealed it's a magical tracking device. You can only pry it off after you register and earn your guild certificate. Essential for public order and for Misadu, it cut through the chaos like a GPS, steering everyone back onto the right path, thank them. Before he even stepped inside, he was convinced everyone saw the tiny winged dolls dancing around him, but the guards blinked, puzzled, and asked what he meant. The dryads smiled, and Masato's chest dropped as he realized they were invisible to everyone else. He barreled into the city and, on the guards' advice, darted straight to the guild to claim his certificate. Weaving through the streets, he quickly found the Agriculture Guild. Stunned that such a place had been found so quickly, after he'd once worked himself to exhaustion, he stepped inside, certain a peaceful life awaited. A bright-eyed young woman swept up to him with a warm grin and asked, "How can I help you?" Masato shot, "Do you issue certificates here?" She nodded sharp and explained that once the card's issued, she'll need his ring. He leaned in and pressed if Masato was truly certain about joining the Agricultural Guild, and Masato squared his shoulders and nodded, sealing his choice. Convinced it would kickstart his new life, she thrust a form into his hands and told him to fill in his details. He waited for his document, relief flooding him that they hadn't asked for his address, when she suddenly called his full name. She thrust the Agricultural Guild membership card into his palm. Then she cocked her head and fired. Which part of Shindo Masato is the surname? She figured Shindo was the family name and Masato the given name, so Masato. He confessed he'd come from a place where names play by different rules. She blurted, "Is this strange?" then settled on calling him Masato. As a Japanese person, he flushed and shrank back whenever someone called him by his name without honorifics. She jabbed a finger, demanding he pay the 1,000 registration fee for the guild before she'd take his ring and hand over the card. Masato nodded and vowed to round up the money soon. Then he shot the question across the room: where could he sell the dragon scale Heimvar had shed? He whipped out the rare item. The girl's jaw dropped as she wondered how he'd gotten it, and he smirked, explaining that the Adventurers Guild, which actually operates like a pawnshop, trades in things like that. And when he fired off the question about the average monthly expenses for one person, she shot back that there were about 30,000 of them and swore dragon scales would more than cover the registration fee. Masato clung to the thought that if another currency equaled 1 yen, he'd have enough money. At the Adventurers Guild, the staff recoiled at the dragon scale, panic flaring as they scrambled to measure how much dragon still clung to it so they could pin down its worth. Tests clocked it at 0.5 grams per milliliter. The result screamed ancient dragon. Its dragon level matched its rank. He left reeling, all crashing through him as the majestic, blazing crimson dragon revealed itself to be ancient. He zeroed in on the measurement and froze when the readout showed 0.5 grams per milliliter, practically microscopic. The employees erupted, shouting him down and pounding home that it was a colossal sum. They clocked it at a jaw-dropping 1 million ether. Masada marched back into the agricultural guild to pay the registration fee and talk over buying land. And the registrar, reading his intent, asked him to remove his ring. Get a clear on-the-record yes, confirm they offered to buy the land. He warned him to hold off on buying agricultural land, hammering home that rent runs a staggering 54,000 of another currency per acre per year. When land hit a jaw dropping $900,000 per acre, advisors shoved renting at him first. It's massively cheaper. Masato leapt at renting land. It let him test whole fields of different crops without draining his wallet. If he declared to the receptionist he'd take the rental option, she snapped, ready to pick a location. She thrust a glossy brochure into his hands and jabbed at the pages showing plots of land primed for this season. He reached out and plucked the tomatoes and soybeans he'd coaxed to life back in elementary school. At first, he shoved 220,000 straight into other people's hands. Storm over to the girl and belt out a fierce thank you for her help. She fixed him with a hard stare, asked if he was a traveler, and warned bluntly that trying to farm this land alone would be a brutal, lonely grind. Masato insisted someone's already helping me. Even if the druids couldn't catch a single word, his meaning slipped right through their fingers. Once they'd tied up loose ends, they snagged an apartment. You stared out the window, a plan burning in your chest. Tomorrow you'd start working on the farm. In just half a day, the life he dreamed of snapped into place. The next morning, he tore out to the rented land, far from the city's chaos but planted on the outskirts so he could call for help if needed. The dragon descended and he missed her at first. He switched to enhanced vision, her silhouette snapped into focus and they greeted each other. She shot him a grateful grin and thanked him. The druid's invisibility spell had let her slip up to the city unseen. She quelled Masato's panic with a firm promise that it had worked, then pressed him to reply right away. He streaked over the field, slinging a light spell that traced glowing lines across the grass, then descended and landed. He urged the dragon to churn their special mix into the soil at the marked spots, and she agreed without hesitation. She tore open her storage magic and unleashed a billowing, black mist of dust that rolled over and swallowed the fields. Last night, Masato asked her to torch a distant grass field, turning it into wood ash for him. Later, once it dried, they hailed it as the finest sheet of ash they'd ever seen, and Masato's curiosity ignited. Why had it turned out so perfect? Dry revealed dragon dung was packed with nutrients and made the crop surge to life, an outcome Masato hadn't expected. He plunged his hands into the earth to carve deep furrows, and the dragon snapped, "Are furrows heavy patterns on human fields?" The suggestion slammed into him, her claws could help. She slashed her claws across the field, carving flawless furrows and razor-sharp ridges. My jaw dropped watching that hulking creature perform delicate, surgical work with pinpoint precision. It's got to be insanely agile. Meeting her in this world set my heart ablaze with joy. He asked her to carve an even number of furrows before the lunch break, and after they labored in the field, the dragon leaned in and suggested they get properly acquainted. She's fed up with being boxed in as just a dragon, done with everyone calling her nothing but her species. When her fingers closed around the scales she'd kept, heat flared through her, and Miss Otto knew she was a burning crimson dragon. She admitted it, cheeks burning with shame over her name as she begged for a better one, and Masada blinked, incredulous she'd introduce herself with a name she loathed. He tossed out Duremen as a joke because it sounded like dragon, and she shot it down instantly, saying she's a girl and wants a shorter name. Surprise slammed into Masato. He couldn't tell her gender, so his mind frantically ran through every girl's name he knew. Masato finally breathed the name Kimovari, and the dragon's face erupted with relief and joy. The name struck him as odd yet irresistible, so later he leaned in and asked what it was. Masato bowed smoothly, introduced himself and asked her to call him Masato. She nodded, understanding shining in her eyes. They pressed on in the field, and mid-planting a jolt ran through him. His agility had snapped into infinity. Curious if this meant he'd be able to sling seeds flawlessly, he tried it, and was blown away. Seeds rained across the entire field like fireworks, and the dryads erupted in praise, awarding its seed throwing the highest score. Stunned and on edge, he snapped, how did he manage to hurl it away like that? Her gaze snagged on a strange trajectory across the seats. When she leaned in, she saw every seat buried exactly 20 centimeters deep. He froze, stunned by Masato's skill, guilt prickling for underestimating her, so he flipped tactics and barked for everyone to start watering. The dryads stepped forward, vowed to summon the rain, and proved they could. Masato entrusted the task to them. They dropped into prayer. Moments later, a cloud billowed up over the field. Rain slammed down, Masato's eyes sharpened. He recognized the pattern, wondered what other mysterious powers he could unearth, and locked his assessment skill onto the cloud. A blessed rain cloud, born of the dryads and summoned only when they prayed, burst over the land. Its water soaked the soil and sent plants leaping into furious growth. They clung to the shockingly false belief that a farming ability that powerful actually existed. He shouted his thanks to him, Varya, and the dryads, then commanded the dragon to return home. Greed gnaws at me, I tell them to call her at any time. I stride out of Masada, planting and watering are finished. Now only the harvest waits to be gathered. Crops flourished under his hands, and Masada dared to believe he could finally call this place home in peace. Even while chopping and stirring a simple meal, a fierce ache for the clean, soulful flavors of Japanese cuisine simmered beneath his skin. The world lay stripped bare of its culinary lifelines. No soy sauce, no vinegar, no miso, no mirin, not a single grain of rice. He thought about growing soybeans for soy sauce and miso, and realized that he could prepare a dish right away. The next day in the mountains, Masato zeroed in on a charging boar, stunned it senseless, then scolded it with a thrilled grin. He snapped, I asked for a mountain of wild greenery, not animals. Confusion knotted her gut as she watched him dispatch the wild boars with effortless ease. They'd only come to gather ingredients. Salted egg pudding for Chew and Mushy, he'd already snatched the eggs, but the dish demanded mountain vegetables and mushrooms, so he begged him, heart-hammering, to fetch them and bring them there. He dared to ask if Boar could turn the dish into something incredible simply by stashing it in the storage skill. A sudden flicker in the neighboring tree snapped his attention. He looked up and instantly recognized Japanese wild parsley and clusters of oyster mushrooms. He was sure he'd nailed the start, then Himnoari's eager shout called him. She exclaimed, I found delicious mushrooms. Masato's gaze snapped to them, poisonous fly agarics, recognized in a heartbeat. It's laced with toxic compounds, evythinic acid and muscimol. She shot a frantic warning at her about their danger, silencing him mid-breath. Kimavari, unfazed, told Masato not to worry. His iron endurance surged, and the mushroom's shockingly bright taste stopped Masato dead. A flash hit him, the fly agaric was poisonous, its flesh was a plant acid. It blasted umami into overdrive, 10 times the kick of glutamic acid, so fierce that mushroom fans who dared taste it spat it straight back out. Ignore its toxicity, and it transforms into a dream ingredient. Masato sprang into action to gather a few things. Himori nodded it was a smart plan, and Deadpan revealed she'd found something tasty. What drove Masato to snatch the family's citrus? Its pungent aroma blasting into the room. It begs to be bitten and to melt into a pillowy filling. He snatched up every last thing he needed. As they headed back, he finally blurted out the anxiety clawing at his chest. She couldn't resist tasting his dish, and Masato nodded, convinced it was a brilliant idea. Returning to the city, they forgot she'd activated her invisibility spell. The guards panicked, and when the dust settled, Masato leapt to the stove and started cooking. The lineup slammed onto the table. Processed wild boar meat, oyster mushrooms, expertly crafted seasoning, and market eggs. Zesty citrus and wild parsley ignite the silky chowan mushy. He whipped the eggs into a froth and brewed 3 times as much broth. They unleash alchemy, dissolving any double-channel details in broth water and transmuting them into concentrated seasoning. He whirled the broth and eggs in a bowl, bursting every bubble until the surface lay silk smooth. I piled the meat and mushrooms into a bowl, then drenched them with the egg mixture until the bowl was 80% full. No steamers in sight, he snatched a frying pan, poured water into it, set the cups inside, and heated them. No foil to use, he whipped up a barrier spell instead, erecting a shimmering wall of magic. 10 minutes later, he snatched it off the heat, tilted the cups and peered. The liquid had turned crystal clear, signaling the dish was ready. Perch a zesty citrus slice on the rim of each cup. Steam burst upward as the chowan mushy made its entrance, silky, fragrant, and gloriously ready. Before stepping onto the balcony to tell him where everything was ready, he paused, eyes locked on the meager serving, wondering how she could possibly eat such a tiny portion. Her colossal size made the task look impossible, but Himawari asked him to wait. She exploded into radiant light as magic coiled around her, shrinking her down into a small human girl. She eased against the balcony railing, eyes alight, and fired the question at Masato. What do I look like as a human? They left him reeling, relief washing over him as they finally sat down to eat together. I flinch, worried I look proud. They slid into their seats at the table where Masato had set the dish before them. A blessing washes over both of them just before they tear into the meal. He denied her the chance to sink her teeth in. They begged her to squeeze a lightning-bright splash of citrus over the top to electrify the flavor, and she obliged, squeezing it before anyone dared taste. The dish exploded with flavor, and Masato gushed that its texture was flawless. Parsley and mushrooms injected lively texture, and Himawari relished the dish's soft, sumptuous flavor. Tears sprang to Masato's eyes the moment realization slammed into him. This was the exact taste he'd been yearning for. He bit the mushroom and went rigid as a tidal wave of umami slammed into him. A cold clarity slammed into him. He finally grasped why mushroom enthusiasts hunted down the poisonous species. He blasted a quick detox spell that purged the poison, and relief surged through him. Magic let him savor the taste in this world without fear. My breath caught the poison still couldn't touch him. Nerves crackled through both of them, yet they tore into their food and kept laughing and chatting happily for the rest of the meal. When the last bite vanished, Kimavari burst into praise, crowning Masato's cooking a masterpiece. He asked us if she wanted more and she shot back a breathless, eager yes. He asked her to set aside a portion for later. She lit up, and Masato vowed he'd save it next time. Tagging along with her, it hit him. A pinch of cleverness could turn every meal in this world into something he'd relish even more. The next day, time on his hands, Masato wandered past shop windows and locked onto a steak seeker, the very thing later used. The price hit him like a blow, so he resolved to craft them himself from his own harvest. It would cost far less. In that instant, Carol of the Agricultural Guild burst onto the scene. He shot her a grateful look, thanked her for the morning's help, and pressed her for an answer. Carol grinned and said she was out buying supplies for her home garden. It was the guild's day off, so she leaped in, volunteering to lead him through the shop as a guild employee, laser-focused on guaranteeing the client's success. Masato agreed on the spot and Carol beamed. Masato's pulse raced at the promise of endless surprises and unexplored realms in this world, and Carol unveiled the magical instruments. Armed with a seed penetration barrier that stops weed seeds cold, and a built-in sprayer that makes watering effortless. He told her they'd have enough to ride out the dry spell until the gracious rain returned. He boasted he could seize the storm clouds and twist the rain to his will. No one else had ever seen the dryads. He demanded answers, leaving Carol gaping at his sudden, rock-solid reliability. His gaze snapped to a familiar can of liquid fertilizer. Disbelief slammed into him. What was it doing in a city with no factories? A place where ammonia plants for fertilizer have no right to exist. Curiosity burned through them. They had to know how it was done, so Carol pressed herself to the wall and stole every whispered clue. He revealed that dungeons were dropping liquid fertilizers like loot, and the soldier froze. Then greed lit his eyes at the thought of profit. He announced the growth stimulants, priced at 5,000 other per can, ripped 5 days off crop maturation for every acre. Masato's shoulders slumped in disappointment. She leaned in and asked, "What's wrong?" He confessed he'd been craving an instant, video game-style gathering effect, and when Carol asked him to clarify, he fired off the explanation. She revealed the amplifiers sprang to life only during the harvest. Masato realized the costs utterly crushed the meager benefits. Carol snapped that only wealthy farmers could squeeze a profit out of them. Seeing Masato's dragon scales, she dared him to plunge into the dungeon and seize the items himself. A lightning-quick idea erupts, and later the action shifts to the dungeon. He supercharged the blade, imbuing its edge with lethal sharpness and its core with crushing strength. 10 MP stared back at him. Spells were impossible. Only brutal physical attacks remained. My mind raced, tallying the nightmare of hoops I'd have to jump through to score growth stimulants, when someone suddenly walked in. She snapped, "Why drag me into the dungeon? You insisted you could handle it yourself." Masato begged her to scour every corner and seize anything she could find to keep him safe. He asked her to be his recommendation contact, and she flared, offended because she felt he'd started seeing her differently. Her draconic presence sent monsters screaming into retreat, easing Masato's life. He later warned the adventure would plunge deeper, and if the monsters never appeared, the Himari plan would become unavoidable. He flung open his status window and triggered the skill, sure a lift in the dungeon would come in handy. The moment the dungeon shuddered, the system snapped to life and sealed the construction as complete. Masato and Himawari gaped as a lift erupted from the ground, its cables snapping taut and streaking up to the ceiling. The moment the door swung open, Masato's architectural instinct snapped to life, his mind flooding with razor-sharp blueprints and impossible angles. Confusion crashed over him, troubled, stunned, perplexed, while Masato shrugged and nonchalantly announced he'd built an elevator. She snarled, furious that he reshaped the dungeon's layout with maddening ease. They plunged down the elevator into an ambush of enemies, and when the doors spat them onto the ATAF floor, a colossal bear monster reared up and barred their way. When Masato dared ask if it was stronger than him, I heard him spit one word: no. Seeing his odds were just 1 in 100, Masato moved like lightning. He squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck the man's neck and killed him instantly, and a card tumbled out. Confusion clouding his eyes, Himawari barked, "What happened? What did Masato do?" He snapped that he'd only struck the weak spot, then fixed his gaze on the card. A shaking call card that whisks you away with the Great Storage's magic. They blurted, "Do only bears drop it?" I snapped that same level monsters can drop similar loot too. Masato barely formed the thought crocodile-like monster when it lunged. She didn't even have time to answer. He sliced the crocodile's neck with surgical precision. She fumed about its speed and the thing that toppled, a tiny vinyl greenhouse, perfect for growing plants. Masatov's jaw dropped. He'd never expected it to be this useful. It threatened to sprout a booze-soaked mushroom right on the deck. Presuming they were mushrooms, Gamovari ripped into an explanation. He vanquished a white, ancient disease, one of the 5 deadly epidemics. The truth hit like a thunderclap. Her mother had it, and she had only 300 years left, so her hope collapsed into dust. She insisted growing mushrooms that break down alcohol could have saved her mother. Masada practically vibrated with excitement about their cultivation. Still craving a growth stimulant, he fired off, "Do these mushrooms even have spores?" Heimwehr shrugged them off as ordinary but warned they're brutal to cultivate, and Masato spat bacillin and bacteria, the deadliest poison on Earth. They surged forward, and even the lightning-fast mimic couldn't match Masato's relentless stride. I slammed the duplication map back to 0, wiping away every duplicate it had pulled from the dungeon. He swept his gaze over the floor. Every monster lay vanquished, but the growth accelerator had vanished. They plunged deeper into the 81st floor, diving headfirst into its lethal dangers. This sin stumbles into a snake monster and is instantly cleaved into sashimi. Masato's world jolted. He'd missed something shockingly familiar. This growth accelerator rockets through 3 months of growth, and a simple dilution lets you stretch or slash how long periods last. Unlike the store version, which lets you snatch crops from the fields the instant they ripen. Then I stand revealed as a glass lizard, my body alive with dark spots from snout to tail. Organic glass blazed from the ceiling, casting merciless light, and when Masato demanded to know what it could do, she explained the shell was detonating, spitting explosive shards of glass in every direction. Alarm blazed. He smelled a trap. The thought of clashing his blade against a creature of glass chilled him. The lizard had already locked onto them, so Masato had no choice but to strike. One clean slash tore it into pieces that tumbled down, and a strange relief washed through him. Henry Murray flaunted his swords, crowing they were razor-sharp and unbreakably strong. When the monster released the glass slipper, it clattered to the ground, and Cinderella's clinic could permanently remake whoever wore it into a beautiful woman. Masada snarled that the glass slipper wouldn't make a man handsome. It would transform him into a beautiful woman. Scoffing at it as pointless, they turned and strode home. I hesitated and asked if they'd press on. Leading them felt pointless, and Masato confessed he wasn't truly cut out for adventures. They split near the dungeon, and I leaned in, whispering for him to contact her the moment he reached the vinyl house. Later in the city of Masato, he set out to unload unneeded wares, hawking a fragile glass slipper. He stormed into the Adventurers Guild, and the same clerk who'd handled his dragon scales locked eyes with him as recognition snapped across his face. Heart-pounding, they stared at the shoe, convinced they'd stumbled onto Cinderella's legendary instant sparkle. She stepped back to inspect it, and moments later screams exploded from behind Masato. The staff barreled back, declaring it a first-class artifact, a force that can twist alliances and bend the bonds between nobles and royals. She demanded where he'd found it. He snapped that it came from the dungeon's 81st floor, and when she pressed him for details, she unleashed a licensing charm, scanned his words for the truth, and Visato froze. He never expected her to doubt him. Suddenly, a man with an eye patch materialized. He'd been eavesdropping on whispers about the 81st floor. He demanded, was Masato the one who returned from the underground and already knew about that strange new structure there? Masato shot back, "You mean the elevator," and declared he'd built it because hauling things between floors was a nightmare. He tossed out offhand reflections that blew them away, while his brazen actions scandalized them. He froze, fingers hovering, torn between yanking it free or leaving it be. The guild offered to fling it open to the public and hand him a 3 million annual licensing fee. Masada didn't block them, but doubt gnawed at him. This guild couldn't shoulder the cost. I barked at them to transfer the collection and payment for the glass slipper through the agricultural guild. He sighed, eyes wide. He couldn't believe how everything had flipped. Money piled up, and he dove into a wild shopping spree. He locks onto his status window as the bars snap into place. Balance floods him. He crackled with 25,500 health points and 4,500 mana points. Relief slammed through him the moment his MP surged. He wouldn't run out of magic while farming. Later, out in the fields, he crouched and schemed how to unleash the growth accelerator. The dryads urged him to stir it into a single smooth brew, then guided his hand as he poured it straight into the rain clouds. His jaw dropped. It had bays. He tipped the flask and poured without asking why. Heavy clouds rolled over the fields. Rain slammed down and the amplifier and seedlings shot skyward, exploding into a blur of turbocharged growth. The plants shot skyward and sagged under their own weight, so Masato warped gravity to prop them up when there were no support poles. The plants burst with nearly ripe tomatoes, soybeans, and edamame, and Misadu, stunned, seized half the crop to harvest. And a roll call of the most urgent aid they vowed to deliver. While buying tomato stakes, he barked orders to several dryads to brace the plants while the stakes were set. The dryads threw themselves into helping Masato. The growth enhancer needed a full 4 days to recharge. He urged them to hold back and wait to harvest the rest of the crop. After 4 days, they stormed the fields and hauled in every last tomato and soybean. Returning to his apartment, Masato yanked open his storage box and gaped at 20 tons of tomatoes, 892 kilograms of edamame, and 984 kilograms of soybeans. Wasting no time, he activated his assessment skill, scanned them instantly, and his jaw dropped when he realized the tomatoes were eternal. All soybeans, known as divine black eyes, packed a powerful anti-aging compound, tasted incredible, and with just 100 grams a week you stopped aging, your sight doubled and you gained telescopic vision. Like the tomatoes, they unleashed a first-class taste that blew the garden away, leaving every leaf dumbfounded and clueless about what had just happened. When he bit into the raw tomato, its glorious flavor seized him, forcing bite after bite and proving its quality. He discovered the box kept the goods perfectly fresh, stashed a few for himself, and marched to the guild to sell the rest. At the guild, Masato hauled his wares out for sale, parading a colossal harvest that left Carol wide-eyed. My jaw dropped. The newcomer had raked in that much in only 2 weeks. He slapped half the credit for his success on her the moment she mentioned the dungeon. He thrust the growth accelerator he discovered toward her. It blasted 3 months off the growth time. A sudden fog slammed into Carol's mind. She couldn't tell if he said minutes or months, so she shoved the confusion aside. They dove into the harvest, hands flying as they sorted every ear and bundle. She sent the products soaring with telekinesis and watched them hover and snap themselves into perfect order. Masato was convinced the skill sieved the harvest into tiers of quality. Carol's jaw dropped. Every item lay flawless, not a trace of disease or damage. An old man closed the distance and shot out, "Are these the legendary vegetables?" Masato scanned them with a razor eye, dismissed their skill with a cold smirk, and the old man's blood ran cold. They shook him, voices razor-sharp, demanding how he'd grown them. Masato stayed unnervingly calm and said, "Just regular seeds." Carol announced she'd taken them to him, prompting the old man to. They named the legendary dry-eyed fairy his savior, leaving Masato dumbstruck and the companion he'd brought, eyes as dry as the fairies, in even greater shock. He cracked a joke, claiming dry would cut the tension, and Carol flushed, admitting dry only made her think of fairy tales. The old man snorted that the legendary fairies would never be friendly to humans, blind to the dryads standing inches from him. Masato chalked the rich harvest up to the arid climate and the life-giving rains that fattened the fields. The rain slammed into the fields, infusing the plants with a nutrient deluge that catapulted them far beyond their normal levels. Carol declared Masado's products demanded a seller cut from a different cloth. Confusion gripped him until she laid it out. Exclusive sellers sell quality goods separately to keep prices fair. He discovered his tomatoes actually stretched life with a bizarre effect, and found out crops like that can't be sold alongside ordinary produce. He forked over a fortune to hire an exclusive merchant who shielded him from lethal threats and cloaked his true identity. Masato flashed a confident grin, sure he could handle anything, but still asked the dryads to warn him if any suspicious figures came near his house. One dryad promised they'd take care of it. The old man snapped that he'd told the guildmaster to send a trustworthy, exclusive trader. A hooded figure slid out of the shadows, Cole, and Carol instantly hailed him as the perfect choice. He stepped forward, claiming to be a traveling merchant armed with a skill called mystification, and Cole swore to Masato that he could be trusted. When Masato pressed her about the mystification, Carol snapped that it lets you dissolve into mist and slip through the world at will. I discovered Cole's younger sister harbors a rare power, and a ruthless criminal group is hunting her for it. He seized several members, unleashed his mystifying power, shook the fog from his mind, and blared the alarm across their base. The story slammed into Masato, igniting a fierce drive to help and heal. They branded it the possession of goods merchants prized. He bounded over, greeted Cole with a grin, and shoved a thank you card into his hand. Cole froze, eyes wide with shock. Carol's pulse hammered. She knew at once it was a Wyvern circulation map. The elder leaned in, voice low and reverent. Only 5 of them exist, relics of an ancient civilization. Cole's eyes hardened as he agreed. This was the nation's primary mode of transport, pulled out only for a full-blown crisis. Sato demanded to know if it was true, and Carol warned that wielding it would etch his name into the annals of history. They slammed their signatures on the contracts, choked out a final goodbye, and sent Cole on his way to safety. Masato dispatched a dried-up head to ride shotgun beside him. Split the spoils, 75% to Masato, 20% to Kula, 5% to the guild. Kula's slice rewards the risks he shouldered. Before Masato even asked to buy wheat seeds, Carol had already blurted yes, but she was. She gaped at wheat sprouting out of season, jabbed a finger to call him out, and Masato smirked as he pushed his own plan forward. He storms into his field and drenches the soil with growth stimulators, forcing whatever he wants to burst into life. I'm craving tempura. I'm rallying the dryads to forage the woods and haul back every ingredient. Summon Hema Wari now for a high-stakes talk to clear the field for the Alcaldica mushrooms. At first she fought to revive the wilted crops, and the dryads urged him to trust their rain. They spun Masato into confusion, then jabbed him until his gaze snapped to the sight. They summoned rain clouds that liquefied dead plants the moment they touched them. Another dry ability burst forth. The rain devoured dead plants the instant they struck the soil, converting them into rich humus so no compost was needed for the next planting. Amazing Masato erupted in thunderous praise for the dryads. Jamie Worry charged over and asked, did he clear the field? I slammed the object into his palm and dared him to pick where the greenhouse would rise. The tiny package quivered, then burst open and blossomed into a lush greenhouse. Masato seized the chance, darting inside as it beckoned him and, when asked if she had brought alkaloid spores, she jabbed a finger at the nearest stone and declared the spores were scattered there. Masato stared, baffled. He saw nothing until she urged him closer and revealed spores clinging to the stone. Masato slammed his microscope skill to life and gaped as tiny alkyl decommissioned spores swarmed every inch of the stone. It hit him they were everywhere, so he spun to her and demanded whether he should panic or cultivate them as they were, and she confirmed he should cultivate them. He burst into the greenhouse as the console flashed, demanding his okay to use spores to grow the plant. He confirmed instantly and set the stone dead center. The system marooned him outside as the greenhouse dialed itself into a new climate. Moments later, everything inside had shifted. The withered, bleached weeds told Masato the greenhouse now roiled with scalding, pressurized toxic gas, which hemorrhage fuels the ideal bloom of alcaldica mushrooms. Maz Adam sprinted inside to administer the growth stimulant, and I know it, you're probably sure he'll be fine. He didn't buy her bravado. He hurled a metal drum near the entrance to provoke a reaction. I watched it pancake flat and slammed to my knees as a searing blast of heat hit me. Himawari's voice went flat. No one could have survived inside, and Masato's mind slammed into overdrive, racing to find his next move. Himawari snarled, trigger your self-healing. Oxygen vanished, he'd have to hold his breath. He slammed open his skill list and activated autocare, conjuring a life-saving shield that swallowed incoming blows and kept his HP from plunging to zero. Dread twists my gut the moment he steps through that door. Lock your eyes on him and tell him to be careful. The instant he stepped into Masada, vertigo slammed into him when the gas ripped away his body's shields against searing heat and crushing pressure. Inside, the air was alien, nothing like the world outside. A question clawed at him. Had his support skills and iron endurance been the only things keeping him alive, and what would have happened if he'd had neither? There was no time, he could only hold his breath for a few desperate seconds. He zeroed in under the lens, locked onto the spores in a heartbeat, then sprinted straight for the stone. He yanked open the growth enhancer and spotted more spores clustering nearby. They'd been there from the very beginning. He zeroed in and forged exactly those two. Masato burst from the greenhouse, safe at last, relief crashing over him. He'd made it out. I demanded to know where alcalica mushrooms grow and how long it takes for them to shoot up and start bearing fruit. She shot back 1 year and 3 months. Masato dosed the growth stimulant, counted 4 cycles left, and the math hit him. The mushrooms would be ready in 16 days. The chemovars froze, bewildered, until Masato barked that their growth stimulators would blast the entire process into overdrive. Himawari's heart leapt, letting them speed her mother's healing thrilled her. She snatched up the last medicinal ingredients, and Masato swore he'd forge a special remedy to help her mother. Meanwhile, in a deep forest cave, a weak-horned woman clutched her ribs as a hacking cough tore through her every week. Her gaunt pallor and curling horns screamed that she was Himawari's mother, and moments later, Himawari and Masato charged toward a village clinging to the shores of the coldest sea in the world. Masato flashed a fierce grin and thanked her. The biting frost she'd conjured would be his edge in the next task. Fresh from clearing the wheat-planting dungeon, they fired up the oil and set to crafting golden tempura. He darted off to gather the tempura ingredients as he waited for the alcaldica mushrooms. He stared down at the sea trapped beneath the ice, jumped, and a wave of anxiety crashed back over him. Fist clenched, he slammed it into the ice and the thick crust shattered on impact. I watched the alarm freeze in stunned disbelief as the legendary indomitable sea ice cracked for the first time. Masato demanded to know why she'd dragged him here. She hesitated, worried, and offered the simple excuse, there's a lot of seafood, while a tentacle silently slid up behind Masato. Himawari realized the sea had never felt a fisher's line. Before she could finish, Masato vanished. Suddenly he was submerged, a writhing tentacle coiling around him. A grin split his face as he stared down at the giant squid beneath him. Its colossal eye locked onto him with unblinking intensity. In a heartbeat, he blasted upward on flight magic, ripping free of the water while a tentacle held him fast. Worry claws at my chest, I suspect a monster lurks below. A creature burst into view. Masato locked onto real prey and having come this far, yanked it free. Masato unleashed flight magic, wrenching a titanic squid from the surf. It slashed back with writhing tentacles and he tore free, weaving between each furious strike. The memory hit him. One savage strike to the base of the squid's head would leave it stunned. Unsure if his gambit would work, Masato yanked the creature straight into his grasp. The giant squid thrashed in midair, its tentacles flailing uselessly as it hung utterly helpless. He sent him crashing out cold with one savage blow to the base of the head, right above the eye. Masato didn't hesitate. He cast concealment magic and made it vanish from sight. I'm worried, it froze in confusion and was hit by a shot. The squid was only half dead, and the storage magic snapped shut only on the truly lifeless. Masato explained that his storage had branded the paralyzed squid as dead, because the concept of death was too fuzzy to pin down. Himawari staggered. Asato had even dared to shatter the rules of storage magic. She vanished into his shadow, feeling invisible, and Masato stood there, baffled and unable to grasp what she meant. It ignited its flight magic and dove straight beneath the waves, the same gamble that had paid off before. He plunged into the ocean's depths, swallowed by a churning host of sea creatures, schools of smelts and sardines streaking past as he powered toward grab a few. Out of nowhere, a colossal fish erupted behind him, sending the smaller fish streaking away. He spun, jaw-dropping. It was a tuna. Seizing the opening, Masato snatched a sword from his inventory and tore through the water straight at him. He struck with surgical precision and hauled a tuna out of the water in an instant. Plotting to nab more, he eyed a shrimp, craving shrimp tempura, and lunged to snag a few. Masato burst to the surface, clutching a generous catch. Admiration lit her face. Masato agreed and asked her to give him a ride to the market to have the fish processed there. At the Havana market, the seller flat-out refused to process the fish, vowing his loyalty to his fishing boats. Masato nodded, steeled himself, and strode off to try his luck somewhere else. The store manager stepped in front of him and demanded he reveal the rest of his catch. Masato slammed the tuna he'd landed onto the counter, and the manager and his employee gaped, stunned by its dense, gleaming flesh and how impossibly fresh it was. The manager said they only buy from verified clients, but Masato's tuna blew past their usual stock. He stepped forward, volunteering to process it himself if Masato would let them keep a chunk of the fillet. Masato met his stare and asked, "Are you sure?" The manager barked a plan, based the commission on the total amount, and Masato immediately thanked him, gratitude blazing in his voice. The manager beamed, convinced Masato had unearthed the perfect fishing spot. Masato grinned and declared he'd hauled in other fish there, asking if they could process the catch. He tore open his box of belongings and hauled out a giant squid's tentacle. The manager froze, jaw agape at its monstrous size. Masato grappled with whether he'd even be able to process this. The manager lined in, urging them to comb through his storage method with razor-sharp focus. The manager's gaze snapped to the giant squid, its ears and eyes glowing a ghostly blue. My heart slammed into my ribs when I spotted him, a kraken, and I couldn't believe Masato actually kept that monster. Masato's voice was ice cold as he announced he'd severed him and left him paralyzed. The manager gaped, convinced Masato wasn't even human. Masato froze, stunned by the explosive reaction. I leaned in, whispering the truth that the kraken was a legendary squid. Convinced the kraken could be transformed, the manager badgered Masato nonstop to let him and his crew take it. The beast was a rare delicacy. A few hours later they tore through the tuna and krill, then prepped the smelt and mackerel for free, and Masato thanked them. The sellers erupted with even more thunderous gratitude. Masato declared he has another mission, and now. He counted every second, racing the clock to reach the nearest sea. Himawari watched, puzzled. He roared up onto the embankment. Masato locked onto a spot and Himawari snapped, "What are you doing?" He unleashed an advanced alkene spell, forcing the seawater to recoil. Dread tightened my chest, but I wasn't surprised. I just knew Masato was about to pull another insane stunt. Particles exploded out of the ocean, whipping and snapping together until they forged a glowing white sphere. Alarm flared in my chest and I blurted, "Is that salt?" Misadu confirmed it, then shot me a puzzled look and snapped, "Why are you worried?" Alarm bells rang when he dove into alchemy just to pinch pennies on salt. Masato shrugged and said he was only avoiding carrying cash. The game master barked, berating him for treating alchemy recklessly and snapping that he always piled far too many ingredients into every brew. A memory slammed into Mesa. He spun to her and asked for help with a task, and Emma worry snapped, "What do you need?" Misada thrust the mission at her, "Gather the hops for the project." Soon I spotted him striding back from the fields, the hops he'd asked for earlier clutched in his hands, and she thrust them at him, demanding what he planned to do. She rolled her eyes, knowing Sato it had to be another madcap scheme. Masato swallowed his pride and finally admitted she was right. He vowed to craft soy sauce, wheat flour, and beer. He'd already grabbed yeast from the bakery and had nearly every ingredient for tempura and his homemade brew. Himawari spotted the scheming spark in his eyes and knew he was up to something again, so she snapped that she wanted to try everything. But Masato held up a hand and asked her to wait. he hadn't finished yet. He whipped a duplication card out of the dungeon. Curiosity and dread flipped my stomach, so I blurted, "What are you going to duplicate?" Masato slammed the card down and ripped a perfect clone of the greenhouse into existence. When she asked what he planned to grow, he dodged the question and dug up something. I squeezed a single bead of growth stimulant, and the instant it. Right where Masato was buried, a colossal plant shot up from the soil. My jaw dropped as I watched him blurt, "What's that?" And Masato coolly replied, "It's for soy sauce." Her jaw dropped, she was stunned this could become a seasoning. Masato said he still had a few steps left to finish it. Fear clawed at his throat as he begged him to hurry and join him in the city. They burst into the realtor's office, and a young woman looked up and snapped, "What do you need?" Masato demanded an empty lot. She pressed a glossy catalog into his hands. Curiosity flared and a cold knot of worry tightened in my chest, so I blurted, "Why do you need it?" Masato declared he'd forge all the gathered ingredients into a full-fledged factory, eyes blazing with joy at finally getting to unleash his architectural skills again. After the review wrapped, he zeroed in and staked his claim on a sprawling 3.2 million acre plot. The women pressed him, did he want a loan or a guarantor's agreement, and told him they'd take the item as collateral. Penniless, Masato swallowed his pride and applied for a loan. Masato flashed his card and was handed a thick, irresistibly cute service booklet. The women around him gasped at the sight. She froze, the Wyvern circulation map, one of only 5 in the world, trembling in her hands as disbelief slammed her. Masato had spent that priceless relic to buy a piece of land. He insisted it was his only choice. She froze, stunned to find it was far more valuable than she'd ever imagined. Meanwhile, Himawari burst onto the stage with the nearby dry right beside her. Masato's stomach clenched when he spotted someone brimming with unnerving pride, and bafflement slammed into him. Panic twisted through the Waymen as they scrambled, clueless how to secure the card. Masato and Himawari raced to the next stop, reached the borrowed plot, and Himawari leaned in to ask how Masato makes his seasoning. Every time he thrust his palm skyward, he unleashed his master architectural skill, and a blinding light erupted from the city's center. He pictured a factory where the first floor blasted the wheat dry and stripped off its husks, while the second floor thundered as it ground the grain into flour. The third churned out soy sauce, and the fourth brewed beer. Gratitude surged. His food production research became a secret weapon that propelled him into job offers the moment he hit the post-grad job hunt. Every rumbling machine and every finished part is seared into his memory. Out of nowhere, a building sprang up on the empty lot. Fear claws at me as I force calm, certain she'd grown used to Masato's turbulent powers. Then a new presence erupts and slams her off balance, yanking her into a desperate scramble to readjust. She yelled, stabbing a finger into the air, demanding to know what it was. They burst inside and Masato's gaze sliced the floors. Every level matched his vision to the letter. The preparations were finished, but confusion still roiled inside him. I choked out, "Is this what heat is?" Masato's voice snapped as he confirmed they'd start 2 days after the harvest, urging her to return to the field then to witness something extraordinary. Confusion still gnaws at me, and I know I heard him ask, "What did you mean?" 2 days later, Masato unleashed the third dose of growth stimulants onto Hilda's mushrooms. Alarm stabbed me, I gaped at their gargantuan size, and Masato's eyes snapped wide when he realized they're now visible to Nektai. Panic claws at me as I beg the clock to give her mother just a little more time. Then they sweep through the wheat field, scanning every swaying stalk. Masato called to the dryads to sprinkle growth stimulants, and they leapt forward with bright grins, showering the earth in shimmering life. Overnight the wheat shot up thick and sturdy, and Masato's jaw dropped, already ready for harvest. Up close every stalk brimmed with perfect golden grain. It packs a razor-low glycemic index and carbs the body absorbs without insulin, so blood sugar never spikes, safe for diabetics and makes everything taste better. Masato's eyes lit up at those faint but unmistakable strengths, and I watched him openly credit the dryads for their help. Masato flashed a grateful grin, thanked them for their efforts, and together they marched toward the factory. Himawari whooped as she finally fired up the strange machine she'd spotted on the first floor. The wheat lay dried and threshed, worry and surprise knotting my stomach as I blurted, "Is it enough to just pour it into the machine?" Masato shrugged, "It's automatic," and she stared blankly, not knowing what that word meant. He leapt to her side, checked she was okay, then barked, "Time to clean everything up." He hoisted 7 3-tons of wheat into the granary. He'd only been expecting 5 tons per acre, and Himawari insisted the dryads had conjured the extra bounty. Drowning in despair, Masato threw himself at the task, processing each ingredient and lining them up on the designated surfaces. As the machines whirred, Himawari washed up and, voice sharp with disbelief, asked if they'd seriously just sit back and let everything finish on its own. Masato confirmed. Tomori's gut call landed dead on, yet doubt gnawed at her. Were they even really cooking? Masato broke down the purpose of every floor, declaring the fourth the place where the beer ferments and is filtered. The third roared to life, churning out soy sauce with its burgundy tank and pounding compressor. The second pulverized grain into fine flour inside thunderous roller mills. This is the first setup to dry and clean wheat. Machines roar to life, automatically drying the grain and stripping off its husks and worry spikes. This operation has ballooned far too large. She figured it was just cooking, but Masato had built one-of-a-kind contraptions, and he suspected she wasn't there just to entertain. I urge her to stop fretting over the process and sit tight for the mouth-watering payoff. He swore every bite would explode with flavor. Masato's eyes snapped to the sweet destined for the soy sauce. It was ready. The girls squealed, mouths watering as visions of delicious dishes danced before them. Their cheers died on the spot when Masato announced the sweetness wouldn't ripen for a year. Spotting their disappointment, he leaned in and revealed a secret skill that would erase the agony of waiting. He unleashed the skilled temporary adjustment on a bottle of malt soy sauce, and the liquid snapped into jet black ink. The girls gasped, voices cracking with panic. Did it go bad? Masato's voice stayed steady as he revealed the black color was the natural signature of aged soy sauce. Concern burned in me. I was thunderstruck that someone would unleash a spell that potent just to age food. She scoffed. The time setting barely nudged the clock by minutes, not slammed the calendar forward by a whole year. Masato sneered at the restriction, convinced it couldn't touch him because his method kept delivering. I am Vari. The dryads froze, breath snatched away, and he wondered if his actions were really that shocking. I know he roared that with power like that he can toss growth stimulants aside forever. Masato slammed the difference home. Growth stimulants turbocharge a plant's growth while tweaking the timing only rushes the process, and if you botch it, the plants can wilt. Cold dread claws at me as I split the mixture into 2 containers, praying no one catches me. He grinned and said one step remained, but because the other portion was also tasty, he savored it and stalled a bit. He shoved the raw soy sauce onto the stove and fired it up until it was primed and ready. I am anxiety. The dry advertisements barreled straight at me, but Miss Otto slammed into them and stopped their charge cold. He spotted another preparation and a looming external assignment. He strode into the wasteland, nonchalantly channeled advanced alchemy, and bottles erupted from the cracked earth. Ivari had seen so much that I snapped. Where did they come from? Masato snapped that the bottles were destined for the product on the 4th floor. He cranked the fermentation tank's water timing, brewed a fresh young beer, chilled it down, then adjusted the timing again. Filtered to crystal clarity and slammed into sealed bottles, the beer was finally ready. Amis admitted, I'm worried, I've never seen a drink like this. Masato promised, it's wonderful and worth the wait. He rallied others to haul the wheat flour down from the 2nd floor. It's time to cook. Jamie Worry, apron already snug, declared she'd watch Masato's every move to uncover the secret of his famed culinary art. Masato and Himmler Worry sprang into action, whipping up snacks side by side. Masato cracked eggs, dumped in ice-cold water and slammed in flour, whipping it all into a tight ball of dough. Then he cloaked the fresh seafood and the store-bought sweet potatoes. When the oil screamed hot, he fried the ingredients and flung dollops of dough that blossomed into crispy decorative shapes. He also whipped up edamame. Sashimi already sliced fanned across the plates with reckless flair, and Masato landed the final, perfect touch. He uncorked a perfume mediator, unleashing a shimmering mist that let fairies dine with humans. Lunch sat ready, but my gut clenched. The maze had never seen food like this before. Everyone dove into their seats at the table, hungry grins lighting their faces as they lunged for the first bite. The first bites were all it took. Masato Fata Sashingi ignited his senses and proved itself the best he'd ever eaten. Caution prickled through me as I realized the seasoning made the fish fillets sing. He branded it mold extract. Masato shot back, that's soy sauce. He sank his teeth into the Kraken meat and his eyes went wide. It tasted shockingly, outrageously delicious. He raved that the sashimi and tempura were incredible. The chemist gaped. She'd never expected a dish to knock the wind out of her. Masada kicked off its last special day. He slammed a bottle of beer and 2 clear mugs into her hands, then erupted at Mom, rage boiling over. I am anxiety thrown off by the foamy drink, and even the dry adloped froze, baffled. Masato crowed, slapping the bottle down. It's beer, the alcohol that fits Adam Mommy perfectly. I clenched my jaw and stole a silent sip. Her eyes snapped wide with pleasure as the flavor hit. It slammed into her like nothing she'd ever felt, exploding across her tongue with a flawless taste and a perfect aroma. Masada's fingertips slid over its smooth surface. He thanked her for gathering the hops. Worry clawed at me, so I scrambled to gather more, and Masato beamed with gratitude when he began growing them. They dared a bite of edamame, and a rich, aromatic rush slammed into their senses. I know he couldn't stop devouring it. He swore it melted in her mouth. Joy exploded through Masato, reborn into this world. He never imagined he'd revel in food and beer like this. And he grinned, proud he'd built a factory. I arranged every detail. A desperate craving to taste beer in this life surged through me. Lightly buzzed, he blurted a sheepish apology to Himewary for barging into the evening earlier. Swaying, he toppled onto the bed and hauled the blanket over himself. Jamie Worry gaped as the dryad slapped down the highest score. Masato, once a cog in the corporation's machine, never. I'd always dreamed of a life like this. Now, with true happiness surging through me, I realized I'd been fighting all along to wake it. The next morning, Masada's raw vitality shot him awake, fresh, sharp, and totally free of a hangover. The world's magic fit him like a custom-made weapon, and his eyes snapped to an empty space. Mavari was gone. Some dryhead blurted, "She left last night." They shook Masato, desperate to wake him, but he lay motionless, out cold. The gamer spotted a mountain of dirty dishes, and to thank him for the meal, unleashed her cleaning skill, blitzing through the mess until every plate gleamed. Spellbound, she rocketed skyward, hunting down every jump she could find. The dry message hit Masato like a jolt, dread flaring as he realized he'd overstepped, and maybe roused the dragon. But her blazing enthusiasm and flawless cooking struck him like a thunderbolt. It hit him she adored food, and with his shameless love for beer and soy sauce on full display, Masato was certain the whole world would catch her excitement. He bundled the guild's share with his harvest and stormed the market to sell it all. The guild met him with icy silence. Carol beckoned him inside, her voice cold as steel. "We need to talk." Masato felt uncomfortable under Carol's threatening gaze and agreed without protest. Then he cautiously asked what she wanted to talk about. Carol refused to answer and revealed a towering mountain of glittering gold coins. They stormed in from the Adventurers Guild, brandishing Cinderella's slipper and shouting they were there to sell it. The total soared to 27, 4 million others, and even Masato's jaw dropped. Carol gasped, confessed she'd never seen wealth like this, then locked onto one single item and asked about it. Masato declared, eyes blazing, that nobles and kings coveted this shoe. To stay anonymous, he orchestrated the sale through the Agricultural Guild, enlisting the Adventurers Guild to cover his tracks and bury his name. He skirted the nobles, their labyrinth of schemes made his skin crawl, and the guild's ironclad silence felt like armor. Carol's eyes snapped open and a grin cut across her face. She had to admit she was stunned and thrilled that Masato trusted the guild. Then he declared, "I've come to sell the harvest." Carol's jaw dropped. He'd somehow pulled off another harvest already. She hustled him to the warehouse and dialed an appraiser. The wizened appraiser strode into Masato's fields, eyes razor-sharp as he sized up every sheaf of the harvest. He zeroed in on the diabetes-friendly wheat, mesmerized, and proclaimed it an outstanding discovery. He jabbed a skeptical question at Carol, "Do you sell regular seeds?" and a bristled annoyance flaring. Gerald snapped that no such special seeds existed on the market. Masato prayed they wouldn't erupt into an argument. The old man declared the dryads real and in Masato's corner. The dryads recoiled, stunned their secret had been revealed, and Masato's lips curled into a quiet smile. Carol slammed down the decree. The new harvest would be sold only through a hand-picked circle of merchants, and for nobles battling diabetes, this wheat rewrote their fate. The old man grinned, dove into a bold tale for Carol, and wrapped it up just before Cole arrived. Masato barked at them to hand Cole something the moment he arrived. He kept rifling out cards like a gambler on a streak, thrusting them at Cole and declaring he could use them freely. Carol and the old man froze, jaws dropping. 9 legendary, slippery cards slapped into their hands, instantly granting them free travel. The old man barked at Carol to slam them into the guild's most secure vault. Masato smirked and said he could snag those maps from the dungeon whenever he wanted. Sensing the tension, he shattered it by parading his harvest: fragrant spices, fresh new goods, and stacked bottles of potent alcohol. He thrust the products into their hands and dared them to try, testing whether they'd sell. The old man gaped as Masato unveiled brand new products. People clamored to be the first to try them, their joy lifting the crowd, and Masato finally let out a relieved breath. In the cafeteria, he slid the seasoning across the table like a secret weapon and suggested they try it on the fish fillet. Carol inhaled, eyes lighting up. The spice's aroma was unlike anything, sweet and fiery braided into one. The old man locked onto it and prized it as Masato's special soy sauce bursts with potent flavonoids that repair DNA and help fend off cancer. Carol's eyes ignited. She saw it could be packaged and sold as healthy food. The old man barely blinked. Masato's achievement didn't faze him. Masato never suspected the humble soy sauce hid any real benefits. He shoved the plate at them and wouldn't take no for an answer. Carol and the old man dipped the fish fillet in soy, tasted it, and chewed in silence. Carol's jaw dropped. She'd never imagined sashimi could taste this incredible. She insisted the surefire way to hide the salt was a squeeze of lemon or a slick of olive oil, and she promised soy sauce would steal the show. The old man's eyes flashed. He agreed on the spot and declared it revolutionary. Masato erupted with glee. Soy sauce and sashimi actually worked so well in this world. The old man's gaze snapped to the squid. He leaned in and fired off a quick question about it. Masato shrugged and deadpanned. A kraken from the long sea. even as disbelief detonated inside him that the catastrophic monster had been turned into food. Masato bit in, flavor exploded, and he swore he'd catch more. The old man's jaw slammed open as Masato reduced that living creature to mere ingredients. Carol took a bite of the squid and raved about how delicious it was. Elation exploded in the old man's chest when he tasted a rare, once-in-a-lifetime dish. Masato beamed at the triumphant success of his soy sauce. They slammed foaming mugs onto the table, and the crowd's roaring praise unmasked the brew as an anti-aging beer. Packed with ultra-polyphenols that slow down aging, it slashes alcohol's daily harms by up to 633, makes drinking healthier, and consumption from the one's 20s stretches life by 1.5 times. Regret crashed over the old man. How had he not found this sooner? Masato tossed out a detox spell, insisting it would purge any booze the moment drinking started to wreck their work. They knocked back beer and the old man staggered as its velvety softness slammed into him, something he'd never tasted before. Carol also craved the icy slap of bone-cold drinks. Masato dropped the name of these world-lacked refrigerators. Gratitude surged through Carol like she'd just savored a 5-star feast, and she thanked him. The old man swelled with pride as an appraiser, and Masato vowed to crank production into overdrive. When Carol asked where soy sauce came from, he dropped the truth. They revealed it's pulled from wheat, soy, kaji, and born from fermented microorganisms. The old man's eyes lit up as he burst out. Did Masato just discover a new species of microorganisms? Carol gaped at his mastery of biology and crowned him unbeatable in every field. Masato snapped that they'd overestimated him. Carol's hand hovered over those priceless details, unsure if she should share them, while Masato waved her off, insisting it didn't bother him and he wouldn't claim them for himself. He fired off, when's Carl coming back, and Carol snapped 3 weeks. Masato swore he'd haul in extra wheat, pour in more soy sauce, and bring extra beer for the next batch. They pleaded to buy more wheat and soybean seeds. With extra cash burning a hole in his pocket, he bulldozed the land loan and paid it off early. In the realtor's office, the girl's jaw dropped when she saw him. He announced he'd come to pay, and she burst into tears. Joy surged through her and she begged for the trembling card, clutching it like the hem of her dress, while Masato scoffed, sure it couldn't be that hard. He seized the factory grounds and the dried one snapped, what's my next move? Masato declared he'd plant new seeds and begged for their help, Suki agreed. He loosened and smoothed the earth, then scattered the seeds with surgical precision until the whole field lay evenly sown. Masato's performance set the devices buzzing with awe. He then took out the familiar bank. A fierce knowing rippled through the dryads. They stepped forward, seized the growth stimulators, and poured their power into the soil. And from their clouds pours a solution that only grows stronger. Masato snapped enough. Night pressing in, he suggested they all head home for dinner. The dryads brightened at dusk, but Masato himself kept walking home. He raided the market and snagged eggs, garlic, tomatoes, and wheat flour. Dinner today will be a breeze to prepare. Back at home, he snapped a cold, dismissive gesture meant to shut him up. He barreled into the living room and spotted Komori asleep on the couch. The dragon lay asleep, breath slow and serene, and when Masato saw her so calm, his guilt slammed into him. He'd piled far too many tasks on her. Heald crashed into memories of his exhausting corporate job roaring back. He refused to recreate that same harsh environment. They're toxic workplaces that suck the life out of anyone who steps inside. He hissed, urging the dry head to slink into the kitchen and freeze. No sound that could wake her. Masato declared he'd prepare tomato paste without water. She, restrained and burning with curiosity, asked what that was, and he barked that she must watch him work. He tossed flour and salt together, poured in water, cracked in the eggs, drizzled olive oil, then stirred and kneaded it until a smooth, uniform dough formed. What normally took 2 hours, he crushed into seconds by bending time. He sliced the dough in a blur, and the noodles were ready instantly. He unleashed advanced alchemy and conjured a pot. Hurl minced garlic, whole tomatoes, and noodles straight into it. Not a drop of water was needed. The ingredients' own juices burst into steam and cooked the noodles, drenching them in a bold tomato flavor. I jolted awake, anxiety clawing at my throat. Masato's preparing. She flashed him a radiant smile, and Masato, stunned by her sudden awakening, had braced for her to be exhausted. She said the mouth-watering aroma ripped her from sleep. Himawari proclaimed a short nap left her invigorated, then revealed that dragons rest only once a year. Relief flooded Masato as he confessed he'd been worrying far too much. That dinner was almost over when they suddenly motioned for the girls to sit. She practically burst with joy the instant a steaming plate of pasta slid into view right in front of her. Masato piled on cheese and herbs, then spritzed the dish with a perfume spray mediator. Everyone tore into it, and Himawari exclaimed that the tomato noodles are delicious. Masato shot a grin and declared his special method birthed noodles with a flawless, springy bite. He noticed the world had no pressure cookers and a lightning bolt idea struck him: sell them. They feasted. Masato grinned and pitched boiling edamame and cold beers, worry flares inside me. Burst out a thank you and raved that the food from his farm was insanely delicious. A memory struck Masada and he urged her to check the farm with him. The mushrooms were almost ready for harvest. Gamevari barreled onto the Masato's farm, desperate to lay eyes on the mushrooms. He wasn't there, his voice pierced the silence, and she knew he was sincere. Trapped in the second greenhouse, surrounded as the Kaji has exploded and overrun every inch. She yanked him free and snapped, "What are you doing?" Masato flashed a grateful smile, thanked her for the rescue, and said he was getting ready to brew another batch of soy sauce. He apologized for the inconvenience, flashed the mushrooms at her, and I caught the satisfied glint in his eyes. Masato blurted out if they could be moved, and she grinned, "Yes, they can. They just need special conditions while they're growing." Relief crashed over Masato when he saw the mushrooms finally ripen, the worry that had plagued him melting away as his eyes flashed with delight. Atop Owl Hill, a dark mushroom fiercely guards the vital ingredient that treats certain diseases. I'm right where the softly chosen one lingers, sorrow pooling in the corners of their eyes. She flashed Masato a grateful grin and announced a single mushroom can brew a devastatingly powerful potion. So Masato vowed to wring every ounce of power from the remaining mushrooms. He pressed her on how she'd make the medicine. I hung on her every word as she explained she'd mix the prepared ingredients in exact proportions and handle every remaining step herself. Masato conjured a vision from 768. He pictured a witch stirring a cauldron. Instead, I stand here as anxiety in gloves. Grab the mortar and pestle, crushing and grinding as you command the lab equipment. She looked like a scientist, eyes locked on the test tube as she probed the reaction with razor-sharp focus. Masada's jaw dropped, nothing matched what he'd imagined. Seeing her skillful work, he felt a long-buried memory slam into him. The time warrior can, in a heartbeat, erase the memory that she was once a dragon. He cursed at himself, convinced that if he'd taken his university experiments seriously, he'd have landed a great job. The foul stench yanked Masato out of his thoughts and screamed danger. He slammed into action and enforced a sweeping decontamination, purging the entire area. Lethal to humans, the gas slammed down with twice the punch of a typical hazardous gas. A slight tremor ran through Masato as he urgently pleaded, "Be careful." She winced and apologized, calling out the draconian rumor that clung to it. Masato deemed it too risky, unleashed his architectural genius, and built a fume hood that purged the air of toxic gases and invisible microbes. He snapped at her, ordering her to work inside him. I know he apologized once more and then agreed. Masato let his guard ease, his sky-high scores a protective shield, but he kept safety close like a lifeline. In 3 hours, he and Mary cranked out the medicine and had it ready for her mom. She asked Masato for a drink straight from the factory. He poured beer into a mug, and I panicked she'd slam it back in one gulp. Satisfaction gleamed in his eyes. Masato smirked, certain that beer for a dragon was basically an energy drink. Masato's voice sliced the silence, "You're going to your mother now." She nailed it down. The invited Masato would join her to meet her mother, who grew mushrooms in another world. Masato grinned and nodded. He was itching to explore more places. He screamed to be picked up. Panic seized Masato and him, and they bolted. She burst through the mountain pass and reached the lone cabin where her sick mother lived. The landscape lay sheathed in ice, yet Masato's roaring vitality wrapped him in warmth and left him unfazed. Alone on the road and stripped of his skills, he could flounder and lose his way. He was walking when he caught sight of trees glowing. One burst into a riot of rainbow light. He scanned it and his breath caught. It was gaming mummy fur. A globe that materialized whenever someone with over 1,000 numbers neared, forged from ancient dragon genes and multiplying faster than ordinary trees. Masada's jaw dropped. An ancient dragon made it. Himori shot back that her mother had forged it, and the attempt to replace the rare mushroom Owl Hill Doki crashed, and her mother fired off experiment after experiment. They paraded more failures before us, a bush posing as coral and bees that buzzed strangely. Masato's jaw dropped. Maori's mother refused to wait for death and plunged back into her experiments. Panic slammed into me, someone screamed my name, and they barreled into the cave. She said her mother was inside when they stepped into the room. Masada's breath caught at the sight of the woman lying on the folding bed. It was Jamie Wari's mother. She stirred and snapped her eyes open the instant his voice reached her. She lowered herself slowly, then thrust a trembling hand forward, fingertips grazing it. Her voice trembling, she clutched her mother's hand and choked out, "I'm back after a long absence." Mother's smile was warm, yet Masato watched her eyes glaze over. The white wizard's disease had stolen her sight. Confusion erupted in Gemovari. Last time she'd seen her mother, she'd been a dragon. Her mother confessed she'd taken human form just to shrink that device, and Masato jammed a pry bar into the seam and ripped it free. An ancient dragon artifact hummed with cleansing magic, purging the disease that haunted white wizards and granting any dragon 10 extra years of life. Masato waged war for 10 years, a mere blink for dragons. Himawari's mother declared, "This is the best I can do." I squeeze my mother's hand, a gentle lifeline as someone asks, "What's happening?" She finally confessed she'd concocted a miracle elixir to cure her. Her mother froze mid-step, then blurted out, her voice cracking with shock. She cooed, "How did you pull that off?" jokingly, then confessed she was worried she'd followed the theory. He jabbed a finger at Masato and declared him the very man who cultivated the dark mushroom of Al Hill. Masato shot a sheepish grin, apologized for the late introduction, and announced he was a farmer. I'm worried. Mom was stunned to learn a human farmer managed to coax such a rare mushroom into growing. Gentle Worry grudgingly admitted it was strange, then demanded her mother take the medicine first. Her mother caught the grave edge in his voice, snatched the bottle, twisted off the cap, and drank. The instant the sip hit her tongue, relief slammed through her, color flared back into her eyes, and she gasped, "I can see again." She snatched the syringe, drew blood from her hand, and shook it, watching the results swirl into view. The negative test struck like a gavel. She had fully recovered. Masato's jaw dropped as the medication kicked in at lightning speed. I know that he threw his arms around her mother and sobbed with joy, while her mother apologized for bothering her and gently wiped away her tears. Masato's shoulders dropped as he let out a long, relieved sigh. Himawari's mother locked eyes with him, thanked him from the bottom of her heart, apologized for doubting him, and admitted he'd saved her life. Masato smiled and said he was glad to help. Joy exploded in her chest when he returned, and her breath caught as she realized he'd tamed dryads, an almost impossible feat. Realization hit her like a thunderclap. She couldn't believe someone could pull this off and couldn't fathom Masato's raw, immense magic or how he made the mushroom grow. Shock slammed into her. How had her daughter crossed paths with someone like that? Explaining it would be difficult. She had to choose every word with surgical precision. Masato blurted that after a string of wild events he lost his way in the forest, stumbled into her by chance, and Gim and Worry led him back to the city, so a conflict-free friendship sprang up between them. Her mother felt it like a thunderclap. That joyful reunion had snatched her back from the brink and saved her life. Sato's claim that he was a farmer flashed through her mind. She pressed him again and he confirmed it. She flashed a sly grin, announced she had the perfect gift for him, and beckoned him outside. Stepping outside, Masato and Himawari froze. Eyes huge and jaws dropped as they stared at an island hovering in the sky, and Masato choked out, "What is that?" Mother Inavari proclaimed it a floating continent, the reward for cultivating Al Hill's dark mushroom, and demanded he accept it. Himawari fired a question at her mother, asking if she'd ever had anything like that. Masato pressed for how to use it. Himawari's mother instructed him to step onto the floating piece of land, and Masato leapt onto it. She barked, "Aim your magic at him." And when he ripped open the status window, the number hit him, 10,500 participants. He slammed 5,000 into the ground. A blazing runic circle erupted beneath his boots. The floating continent rocked, and then suddenly it ballooned outward. Masato stood frozen and mute, a sliver of doubt prickling that he might not be okay. He tested himself, confirmed he was, then owned up. He'd used too much magic and wondered if he'd accidentally buried the mountain in a cave. Momji Cyrillic letter 456, MVA Air Cyrillic letter 456 beamed and sliced through his doubt, assuring him all was fine. He'd get to check it himself later. Masato hurled himself off the continent. The land below shrank again into a distant smudge in his view. She revealed the floating continent inside was swelling with magic, 1 acre for every point of magic. Yet its outer dimensions never budged, no matter how vast the interior grew. She declared the land perfect for farming, and exactly what Sato needed to sharpen his skills. He choked out whether it was even possible to accept a gift that pulsed with such raw power. Worry's mother admitted she'd crafted him to raise a rare mushroom and owl guarded. But after she recovered, she no longer needed him and entrusted him to Masato, who thanked her. She unleashed one last gift, a seat hewn from worldwood, perfect for the man who'd stained the dryad. The dryads beamed and thrust the unusual object into Masad's hands, urging him to take care of it. Surprise slammed into him. He hadn't expected to be handed something so strange. Mom Himawari revealed the intimate, living bond that tied the world tree to the dryads. These fruits supercharge growth and amplify strength. Masada couldn't fathom what she meant by greater heights. They sank the seed into the soil and doused it with a potent growth stimulant. In a heartbeat, a tiny sprout burst through the soil, dropping both him and Warrior's mother into stunned silence. She declared the tree wouldn't bear fruit for 1,000 years. Panic clawed at my throat, but I bragged that Masato had used a growth stimulant for only 3 months. Masato, cheeks burning with wounded pride, snapped that they still had a long way to go, but vowed to watch over the world tree for the dryers. He poured out his thanks to him or to his mother for her generosity. She brushed it aside, saying no gift could ever repay him for saving her life. Dread gnawed at me as the dryads danced in rapture around the world tree, and Masato stood frozen, jaw slack, unable to believe the incredible gift he'd received. It was tailor-made for his dream of sowing a dazzling variety of crops. Eager anticipation pulled him toward the future, even as a cold, knowing anxiety knotted his stomach. Next time we buy seeds, hit Carol with this explanation so she gets it loud and clear. A few days later, his anxieties exploded, forcing his mother, taught Masato to leap in and steady him, calming his racing mind and snapping his focus into place. They commanded him to picture his dream island. Masato snapped his eyes shut and plunged into razor-sharp focus. A figure inched into view right before him. Imvari the dryads leaned in, eyes fixed, then in a heartbeat a small island burst into view. My heart racing, an ecstatic mother shouted that it had worked. Masato can create islands invisible from outside the continent. Objects made off the island snapped back to ordinary size and shrugged off its warped space. Mother Himawari declared the island's very ground could reshape into anything Masato dreamed. Without warning, the island erupted, spitting a geyser of black liquid skyward like a monstrous fountain. Panic clenched him, convinced they'd failed, but Masato flashed a calm grin and told her everything was exactly as he'd planned. He'd pictured an oil field from the start. Panic clawed at me, I knew nothing about the oil fields. Masato shot his hand out, unleashed advanced alchemy and yanked himself back. Funnel the inky black liquid into clear plastic bottles. Hinamuvari's jaw dropped as the inky liquid coalesced and snapped into crystal-clear bottles, and Masato grinned, explaining, they're plastic bottles. A concerned mother, froze in disbelief when Masato's first creation on the island turned out to be a plain container. It laid bare his habit of choosing the unexpected. Imori puffed up and crowed she wasn't surprised at all, and Masato smirked, poking fun that she'd been the one who looked shocked just moments before. Triumph surged through her, she'd actually forged the bottles, and Kimavari already knew exactly what they were for. Later, Masato stormed through his factory's third and fourth floors, bent time itself around vats of beer and soy sauce, then boomed that everything was ready. I called it they'd fill the bottles with product, and Masato confirmed it, saying they'd have to be packaged for sale. When the oil field ran dry, Masato scraped up the island's last soil, fused it into dozens of gleaming glass bottles, and dared Hanwari to picture him pulling the same stunt in the urban wasteland. He could see digging holes in a packed crowd would unleash chaos. During the performance, sleep hit her like a freight train, yanking her eyelids down. She stared, pulse racing, as bottle after bottle slammed full. Masato unleashed 10,555 bottles of soy sauce and 102,870 bottles of beer. 10,000 servings of soy sauce and 100,000 servings of beer hit the market at once, and Carol knew she couldn't handle it on her own. He used a wiper and circulation card to cram extra bottles inside and reclaim precious space. Masato poured out every detail to Carol, then gripped the valuable card and thanked her. He barked, "Don't call the evaluator," dared her to taste the products herself, and coolly dubbed one a seasoning and the other a drink. Carol's eyes snagged on a strange container she'd never seen before. She demanded what it was made of, and Masato replied, "Plastic, a bottle." She thrust the empty one toward Carol to see, and Carol's fingers sank into its softness as the fabric rustled. Masato swore it wouldn't shatter if it fell. Carol's eyes lit up as she instantly saw how useful it was. It would only fetch coal, so she stashed it for his return. Masato bowed, grateful for her care, and Carol snapped, "What's your next move?" Masato dropped a bomb. He demanded 7 hectares of wheat and 3 hectares of soy. Carol yanked the reins, telling him to slow down. His plans would swamp his 1-hectare plot. Masato caught the shock on her face and knew right away she had no idea what had just happened. He claimed an acquaintance had handed him a coveted parcel of land, and Carol's stomach dropped. She feared he'd been duped. Masato swore to her it wasn't true. He spilled every secret about the floating island. He decided 50 hectares were his now. Carol nodded, hardened by Masato's baffling, incomprehensible actions. Masato demanded to know if she truly agreed with it. Carol, presuming he had acres to spare, asked if he needed anything else. Masato requested a staggering 8 hectares of carrots, potatoes, and onions. Burdock and Taro watched as Carol etched the order. Masato ripped up the land lease and snatched his money back, and they slashed their spending on new seeds. Masato and Himawari touched down on the floating island, whose colossal expanse turned them into tiny ants from above. I slipped back, clutching the wood ash Masato had asked for. The dryads pressed their hands to the earth and vowed, with fierce devotion, to call down rain to bless the land. Masato, in his role as a Himawari, erupted with a thunderous thank you for their help. She swooped, flinging wood ash pulled from her dimensional pouch, while Masato, hands steady, hurled seeds with his signature technique, and the dryads bowed, chanting for rain to soak the thirsty fields. The fields lay ready, and Masato slammed headlong into a brand new problem. The land stretched into an endless expanse. His stash of growth accelerators couldn't hope to cover it. Craving more, he must plunge deeper into the dungeon. Masato sprinted for the dungeon, charging his blade with a flurry of crackling arcane spells. He shot the dryads a thankful nod for their help as the sword's intelligence indicator locked onto him, but it never spoke. I am cautious. She flattened herself against the dungeon elevator's wall, hiding like a shadow. They ranted about being stuck at depth 90. Masato, confused, vowed to dive in deeper at level 160. She confessed she couldn't handle that level in human form, begged Masato to enhance her, or offered to wait outside, anxiety clawing at her voice. Masato hunted down the perfect buff, slammed the enhancement on with a heartbeat to spare, and fear vanished from her in an instant. Power surged through her as she asked about the skill. Masato boomed that it would supercharge every ability she had. It keeps running without him, a lifeline in emergencies. I forge my confidence here. At level 160, I know he noticed how effortlessly they surged forward. But the boss wasn't a person at all, it was a titanic octopus, its tentacles thrashing like living whips. He shrugged off the sinister hum of her tentacles. She was too drained to fight back. Masato snatched the sword, surged forward, cleaved the octopus in two, and it vanished the instant it died. He clapped his comrade on the shoulder, thanked him for the backup, and said Masato could finally track his movements. Masato blinked, stunned to find herself more riveted by him than by the battle. Look, I already told you. She'd always craved watching Masato crush his enemies with a single bone-shattering strike. It hit him like a punch. These monsters were probably far deadlier than the ones he'd shot at before. Then something the octopus had dropped snagged their attention. A laptop blazoned with the words "Super Magic Computer." Masato's breath hitched and he flung the MacBook from his hands. He couldn't believe an object from his life as a corporate slave had shown up in his new world, and he muttered, troubled by the reminder of a second chance. Masato's worry flared. The laptop's sudden appearance crashed over him, stealing his breath and leaving him unable to explain his reaction. He admitted it had once been his deadliest enemy. Then he turned it to his advantage and pinned all his hopes on it. Deep in the dungeon's heart, a winged silhouette tore into view, eyes shimmering and a halo igniting above its head. Soon, Masato found himself staring down Lucifer, a humanoid monster born from the 9 divine trials. Certain there wasn't a soul here, he surged forward and struck without pause. One brutal hit sent the monster crashing to the ground, powerless to fight back. Imavori's jaw dropped, the fight was over in a heartbeat, and something plummeted from the creature, the Imperial Elixir. One sip crowns a nation's leader immortal. Rule with mercy and they are granted endless life. Rule with cruelty and the moment they outlive their natural lifespan they snap dead. The elixir's verdict holds in every government. Masato's heart sank, it wasn't meant for him. In a country with no single ruler no one could use it, and he stared, baffled and aching to know why they'd given it to him, while Haima's worry froze him speechless. Masato cradles the elixir like a prize and plots to sell it at the guild later. Meanwhile, the dryads watched from the branches, their leaves trembling as if they'd seen it coming. The group plunged deeper into the dungeon, slipping past a chamber cloaked in silence. Masato snapped his head toward nearby monsters, ghostly, transparent bears dubbed killer bears. They dove for cover, Masato's gaze snagging on their translucent shapes, and Himmelvery snapped that those beings had no physical bodies. It bursts into view only when it strikes, so no single shot can bring it down. Gratitude hit Masato, her presence anchored him, and her calm explanations loosened the knot of tension in his chest. He charged headlong, trusting only his sword. I, heart racing and bewildered, yelled, "Where are you going?" Masato plowed through the killer bears, felling each one with a single devastating strike. As the monster hit the ground, Himmelvery snapped, "How did you pull that off?" And Masato smirked, reminding her he'd already infused his sword with a buff. Himavara knew about the buff, but insisted it only affected monsters immune to physical attacks, not solid flesh-and-blood assassin bears. Masato snapped that his shockingly clever staff had amped the buff to strike every single target, and he, rattled, called the whole thing wild. Doubt clawed at Masato. Could he really become a blacksmith when hardly anyone dared the dungeon's depths and his sword sat unsold? Suddenly, something tumbled free from the killer bears. You rip open Schrödinger's case and it spits out exactly 100 identical cards, never a mix, and once revealed the contents never change. Masato's eyes snapped to the cards inside. A slim 5% shot at the coveted Weaver and Circulation card, and a hair-thin 1% chance at the Dubbing card that could turbocharge his gear and wipe out the need to level up. That move would let him flood the board with more accelerators without breaking a sweat. Greed might fuel the surge, but I doubt it's that simple. She declared the card type was pure chance. With 5 choices, Masato's shot at the right card was razor-thin. Masato agreed with. Remember the skill that can turbocharge his odds, an RNG-fueled wildcard that could flip the whole fight. Gacha players craved pulling their favorite in-game characters. Marvel, I'm worried those odd skills could end up saving us. Masato slammed this into action. In a heartbeat, a fan of cards erupted into existence right before him. He could sweep through every option and seize whatever tempted him. He zeroed in on a single card, snatched it, and the trick hit dead center. The case spat out a duplicate card that sealed it. Every single card inside was a duplicate. Himawari scoffed, calling it pure luck, even for Masato. Masato then zeroed in on the Wyvern circulation card. They cracked open the next case, and 100 Waver cards spilled into circulation. Himawari swallowed his pride and apologized to Masato for ever doubting his abilities. Masato confessed the odds were brutal, just a razor-thin 0.5% chance. I knew he was starting to believe Masato's uncanny skill had actually worked. Masato chose to forge the remaining cases into dubbing cards, and I'm seized by worry and greedy excitement. Those cards could catapult any powerful growth accelerators into overdrive. She admitted they'd found no growth accelerators yet. Masato flashed a fierce grin and insisted they'd appear on the next levels. They skyrocketed to level 161. Soon Masato came face to face with a monster, the living embodiment of a servant, a colossal eastern dragon hovering above the floor, and his jaw dropped. He remembered dragons here were usually kind, so he refused to strike at anything that looked like one. Relief slammed into him when this dragon proved to be the exception. Masato surged forward and chopped the dragon, utterly convinced the win was already his. The beast collapsed, the relic plummeted instantly, and Masato whooped as he finally grabbed the very thing he'd spotted. Ranka Growth Accelerator slammed 10 years of growth into every acre, its duration bending with dilution, and it left no recovery window. Masato snarled with pleasure at its raw power but bristled at the stingy range. Then realization hit him, his own sphere stretched far wider than he'd thought. Its razor-thin recovery window turned it into a priceless relic, and a cold knot tightened in my gut when whispers said it could heal the world tree. A colossal claw shot into view above them, blotting out the sky. They dove aside in a heartbeat. Masato spun and locked eyes with another eastern dragon. I couldn't tell if he was the same type, but his strength slammed into me like a tidal wave. He was far stronger. He rocketed off the ceiling, plunged like a spear, and cleaved the dragon to pieces, exactly as expected, killed with a single strike. Another object plummeted onto Masato, its silhouette screamed growth accelerator, and he figured that's exactly what it was. It sparked a year of explosive growth across 400 hectares, driven by regulated attenuation, while the undiluted form forced a brutal 7-day recovery. Masato grinned, its coverage dwarfed the floating island eightfold, and at this pace, shaving a year off the process would let them sweep in most of the harvest in one go. Wielding both growth accelerators, Masato blitzed his fields and the world tree into readiness. He turned and headed straight for the surface, and I shot out, "Did you finish grinding?" Masato declared he already had the dubbing cards. He burst up to the surface, gave Masato a clipped, guarded farewell, then slipped home. Masato, curiosity flaring, picked up his staff and inspected every inch. We shot straight into the stratosphere and ballooned again during his flight home. He stared down the dry advertisement and implored it to nudge his intelligence up a notch. Perched on the floating island, the dryads stepped forward one by one, pouring their voices and ancient green power into the sprouting world tree. Masato's breath hitched. He couldn't predict what the world tree might erupt into, so he scratched a 5-meter circle around it and feared that tiny ring wouldn't hold. Masato tore open a psychic channel straight into his mother's mind. Guided by the dryad, she proclaimed the tree, roots and all, would span 30 to 36 meters, and Masato's worry stunned her, since the world tree hadn't grown a single inch. Masato flashed a grin and declared he'd brought a potent growth accelerator that would make the tree shoot up, and its fruits ripen in a single day. His mother's jaw dropped as Masato shredded every farming rule with a brazen, unorthodox method. Masato barked to the dryads to unleash rain clouds using a growth accelerator, sparing the world tree as the clouds curled into a ring that drenched the island but left one clear patch over the seedling. Rain slammed down and Masato watched the plants rocket to life, while the onions swelled and were suddenly ready for harvest. He bellowed at the dryads, cutting the rain over that patch and diverting it to pour down elsewhere. Masato and the dryads coaxed the plants back to life together, and when their work was done they stood in a breathless green hush. Masato slammed his palm to his chest and thundered his thanks to everyone who'd given their all. They reaped a mountain of crops in a single day. Masato hunched over the tally, eyes burning as he combed through every figure. The barn groaned under a tidal wave of produce. 52 tons of wheat, 8 tons of soy, 322 tons of carrots, 336 tons of potatoes, 456 tons of onions, 176 tons of burdock, and 704 tons of taro. Stunned by the sudden abundance, he implored the dryad to hold off summoning the restorative rain over the wilting crops and to leave the world tree untouched. The dryads reassured him there was nothing to fear. They revealed the world tree is unlike any other. Even as rain lashes it, Thrive floods its roots and it erupts with life. They drenched it with rain. Panic clawed at Masato as he begged them to stop and yank his magical computer out of storage, scarcely even seeing it. He dove into the built-in Wikipedia, pulled up the entry, and recognition snapped into place. He unleashed 2 world-shaking terms, the world tree and the restorative ring cloud. A trickle of restorative rain siphons nutrients from the surrounding land, pouring life into the tree of the world and fortifying it. It's like muscle training, repeated strain forging raw strength. Masato's breath hitched, the seedling radiated a livelier, healthier glow than usual. Soon the dryads proclaimed their task finished. Misato hovered her hand over the growth accelerator, itching to unleash it and make the tree rocket skyward. They let one dryad sink into rest whenever exhaustion hit, honoring the relentless toil she'd endured. Grinning with defiance, the Dritties snapped they were fine and demanded Masato assign the task to them. Masato sprang to their side. Together they drenched the world tree's sapling in rain, cheers bursting from their throats. The seedling rockets skyward in an instant. Its sprawling branches and dense canopy swallow almost the entire island. Masato feared it would tower over the smaller plants and steal their light. He saw the world tree's leaves below flare crimson and knew in a heartbeat that this red light was perfect fuel for the green leaves to drink in. The grove pulsed with the tree's perfect harmony with the surrounding plants, and suddenly, a white-hot beam ripped free from the tree of the world, and the dryads' gazes snapped to it. They burst into a victorious dance, the world tree already bowing under heavy, ripe fruit, and Masato's heart pounded as he wondered how those fruits would change his life in this new world. The dryads swarmed the world tree, plucking its fat, ripe fruits with giddy laughter and nudging one another, just one each. Masato remembered whispers that the fruits of the world tree could tear open a doorway to the spirit world, but he had no way to know if the rumor was true. He glided up with bone-dry composure and held a fruit out to him. He boasted the world tree thrived because he'd helped care for it. Masato snatched the fruit with a grateful grin, and everyone sank down to eat. Masato grinned and declared the fruit silky and delicious, just like a ripe avocado, and then dared to dip a slice into soy sauce. His impeccable taste hit him square in the chest, and tears burst from his eyes. He snapped around and spotted a bullet right behind him. The dryads flared, bathing the air in a dazzling light as if they were transforming. 12 split into cells, forging cutting-edge farming skills to wrest bigger, healthier harvests from the soil end. They unleashed brand-new plant varieties, and 14 others morphed in different ways, becoming masters of animal husbandry. Everything around Masato blurred and shifted too fast to track. Then a bolt of clarity hit him. He finally understood what it meant to bear the fruit that lets you reach the summit. The system blasted the shocking news at him. His nation slammed down a decree, proclaiming him the country's new leader. A terse bark forced him to yank the imperial elixir from his inventory and slam it down. The realization slammed into Masato. He was now the head of the nation. The truth slammed him. The elixir grants immortality only while he rules justly and dies the moment he turns cruel, so he shoved it into his pouch and kept it at his side for now. Masato's curiosity flared as he watched his self test its new abilities. They met his gaze and then yawned, utterly indifferent. One by one, the birds grew restless and perched along the branches, and Masato, swept up by their nightly farewell, melted into a doze. The system logged their switch to NAT mode. Masato's grin ignited, granting them the hard-earned rest they deserved, saluting their relentless toil and yearning for them to surge back to full strength. After a long beat, he clambered down from the tree and plotted his next move. An inner voice snapped like a whip, ordering him to stop. Masato's eyes flew open when she woke. He urged her to lie back and rest a little longer if she needed. The settlement hissed, insisting she was merely curious. Masato beckoned her to watch closely, thrust his right hand forward, and roared that now it was his turn to give everything. A glowing runic circle ignited on his palm, blossoming outward in a halo that swallowed the entire floating island. The island shuddered and swelled outward. Nearby, the dry-eyed observer froze, stunned by the transformation, and Masato declared he wanted to create something. When the dry advertisement suddenly spat out, "What?" He shot back vinegar and miso. He raced to secure koji mushrooms and lactic acid bacteria to kick his production into gear. Out east, the air itself latched onto the wheat, clinging to it as it fermented. He knew pinning everything on acetic acid bacteria would doom any chance of stable results. This is a pulse-pounding tale of beneficial bacteria and honeyed intestines, rare prizes you claim by cutting them. He plotted to genetically modify honey into a sickly sweet bait that would lure in enough bacteria. He planned to unleash a potent chemical to turbocharge the process, then raise the necessary containment vats on a remote floating island. When ill spotted Masato churning out more bottles, his jaw dropped. Masato revealed he was brewing far more than just miso and vinegar. A brilliant new scheme sparked in him. Later, he and his self scaled the factory roof, wielding his uncanny architectural skills. Masato bolted extra floors onto the building, and strange machines sprang up around him, devices he couldn't even recognize. Riveted, she was convinced he'd fermented them into miso and vinegar. Masato urged her to pick her way slowly. That vast space would demand time to navigate. They turned the 5th floor into a launchpad that sent every defective product out the door. Masada pictured the whole world embracing miso. For now, he chose to whip up a modest bowl just for himself. He slammed together 2 kilograms of salt, 5 kilograms of soy, 5 kilograms of wheat, and the exact measure of Kajim old. He plunged the soybeans into water to soak, then boiled them relentlessly for an hour and a half. Then it plunged into the other components and melded with them. That evening in Masato Kimivari's house, she bolted awake from a nap and caught Masato cooking. He barked to wait for the dish. When he finally unleashed the creation he'd been dying to make, I tensed, sure he'd hatched yet another clever plan, and I couldn't help but wonder what he was preparing for this special occasion. Masada declared he's turning every vegetable they collected into one knockout dish. He plunged razor-thin burdock slices into a vinegar-laced water bath, watching them surrender and soften. Masato gently simmered the taro root, coaxing its dense, rich flavor into a soft, mellow bite. He plunged the tougher vegetables into the pot of water. When the onion yields, he plunges in the miso and coaxes the pot over low heat, never letting it reach a boil. Masato boasted he'd just finished whipping up potato dumplings and miso soup, served them alongside a frosty glass of beer, and Himavari's eyes lit up as she noted the dish looked delicious. They crowded around the table, voices brimming with thanks, and Masato urged the girls to pick up chopsticks, the customary way to eat this dish. The girls dove into the potato mash, faces erupting into blissful grins as the first bite hit like a burst of flavor. Masato's eyes lit up, the sweet and spicy combo with that chewy bite was perfect. Il nodded and they slurped the miso soup. The instant Masato swallowed, a lightning jolt stabbed him, a savage surge ripped through his body, and a vivid map of Japan crowned by Mount Fuji exploded into his mind. A memory of his homeland's taste slammed into him, so vivid and sharp it stole his breath. Himawari's jaw dropped, spices turned every ingredient into an explosion of flavor. He couldn't believe it, every bite of the vegetables he'd grown burst with jaw-dropping flavor. Joy exploded in Masato the moment he saw everyone rush to save the dish. My Japanese instincts flared, one slurp of miso soup, and I was ravenous for rice. A bolt of inspiration struck him. Seltz's ability to turbocharge plant growth could let him cultivate extraordinary rice. His mind ignited with plans to make his dream real and grow the finest rice. At lunch, I watched the exact second the realization slammed into him. She spun around and demanded who this I was. Masato smirked and teased that she'd noticed it far too late. The next day, Masato and his sister clambered onto Himavari, now a towering dragon, and Himavari roared, bragging about his newfound strength. They realized it catapulted them straight to their destination in an instant. For a heartbeat, Masato felt like he'd been strapped into a roaring jet. They surged into motion, determined to track down a single extraordinary plant. They hunted down the exact rice variety to plant, then feasted on the unbelievably delicious harvest. The search hurled them deep into the steaming heart of the tropical jungle. When he stormed in, Masato thrust a stack of race photos at the girls. They faced a gauntlet of traps and slipped into hushed moments as they watched. After work, I saw him spot something and bolt to check it out. She called Masato, and the sight of that hit him like a flash of recognition. He eyeballed it and pinpointed risa, a grass that bore edible, starchy grains, exactly what they needed. Masato's confirmation landed like a verdict. This was the scientific name of rice, and every detail matched. A worried voice stammered, "Is this the right plant?" And Masato snapped, "Perfect, everyone grab as many as you can." He announced, eyes blazing, that their new plant breeding breakthroughs would remake this into a mouthwatering crop. The Juralis exploded with glee and lunged in, snatching it up before Masato could finish. A minute later, he thundered back, clutching a huge package, thrust it forward and asked if it would be enough, and Masato assured her that it was more than enough. Later, on the floating island, he planted rice in a tiny patch and doused the water with a potent growth stimulant and crackling magic. Himavari's jaw dropped. He'd been tending rice the old way and wasn't sure he needed their rain or any other help, and Masato assured him this was only the first step. He demanded to taste the rice first, then shape it through relentless selection. He unleashed his advanced architectural skills and bolted a 7-story extension onto the factory. Masato transformed the new floor into a roaring thrashing and polishing station, ran the first harvest through it, cooked the rice, and laid out 3 steaming bowls so they could eat together. He squinted at the tiny grains and fretted aloud, then marveled that Masato had grown them himself and predicted they'd be delicious. Masato, hope blazing, took a bite. The girls braved a bite, but the table sank into a sad silence. Masato admitted it would only go away, and Himavari, crying, agreed it was barely edible, dry and crumbly like chewing weeds. Masato declared he finally knows exactly what to do next. Himavari scoffed that rice could ever be delicious, and Masato snapped back, voice blazing, insisting it could be sublime. He recruited silk producers to re-engineer the rice so that, when cooked, each grain puffed larger, rounded into smooth pearls and melted into pillow-soft bites. Silence slammed into the room as I clutched my head. Confusion claws at her as she presses Masato for what he meant and how to move forward, then it hits. She's completely tangled up. Masato slammed down the secret. To get flukiness, cut the amylose and crank up the millipectin. Crushed by the chaos, the cell snapped and shouted it'd rather dive headfirst into the periodic table. Masato froze the instant she mouthed the sequences of bases. He collapsed to the floor, sending a terrified gasp through the room. He wanted to quit, wrangling basic sequences crushed him. He couldn't just rewrite DNA's building blocks with a flick of his hand. The dream of a steaming bowl of rice dissolved into a distant, unreachable mirage. I caught worry flitting across his face and blurted, "You okay?" Masato insisted he hadn't felt anxious since joining the corporation. When he glued himself to the glowing computer screen for hours, memories slammed into him, dragging his thoughts straight to his old work laptop. A lightning-fast idea exploded into his mind. He yanked the supercomputer free, counting on it to crush the problem. He fired it up. A DNA Helix app burst onto the screen and the system opened a genome editor that ordered him to hold a living being up to the camera, scan it, then press enter. Masato plucked a blade of grass, and his jaw dropped as its basic sequence burst onto the screen. Gamevar froze, breath stolen. He'd never imagined the tool held that kind of power. Sylph snapped, "What's our next move?" Masato tore through the guide and realized he could rewrite the scanned organism's traits. They realized they could command every parameter, stretch size, shift color, and reshape composition. Worry turned to excitement and I blurted, "Let's dye the rice green and make it Nalan." But Masato shut it down, saying it's too hard to cook that way. Make it just a hair bigger and a whole new world of possibilities bursts open. He zeroed in on the rice's texture, tweaking starch levels to tame its stickiness and control its spring. He tore open the sack, held the grains up, and realized they were 70% starch, dominated by amylose at a staggering 95% to amylopectin's 5%. It looked like Japanese rice, so he lit up and called it promising. I froze with worry and shot back. Why does the ratio matter? Musato fired off the science. Amylose and amylopectin, the two parts of starch, control rice's texture. More amylose keeps grains loose, more amylopectin makes them sticky after cooking. This ratio, no sweat, Masato dubbed it a good question. They decided to build several prototypes. Very jumped in, agreeing and urging they try every version to pick the champion for mass production. Masato threw up a hand and begged them to calm down. Their excitement was already spiraling out of control. Masato unleashed 4 distinct rice varieties, dialing the balance between amylose and amylopectin to sculpt each one's texture. He tapped the file extension and date the Silthead ordered, and the laptop flared to life, spilling tiny orbs of light that drifted out of its screen. Masato's gaze snapped to the glowing spheres and he shot out, "Are those a nucleotide sequence?" They swallowed a comforting lie. She summoned her sisters, who casually devoured the swarms of light like snacks. Masato and Himawari gaped as they ravenously devoured the worms. The leaders shouted, "You all with me?" And every voice shot back, "Yes." Masato's heart dropped as he realized they were trading genetic blueprints by drinking in light. After prepping every last detail, Masato thrust the rice seedlings into the villagers' hands. He pushed for a daring plant redesign, unveiling the 4 options he'd crafted on his laptop. Salts unleashed their magic into the rice, wrapped the task up in a heartbeat, and Sato was ready. He threw them a grateful smile, thanked them, and fired off, "Next we grow rice." Before landing, Masato unleashed a spell that reshaped the floating island, and in an instant pockets of it turned into flooded rice fields. Baffled at first, I froze, then Masato leaned in and revealed these were rice paddies, fields carved out just to grow rice. He unleashed a surge of magic that rewired the land, turning rough earth into perfect planting soil, and Masato and the girls waded into the new paddies to plant rice. He summoned the sylphs, who sculpted the sky into the familiar clouds they knew. Il slammed his palms skyward and ripped clouds from the heavens with a crackling spell that shoved growth into overdrive. The rice shot from green to golden, instantly ready for harvest. Masato's eyes flared, the rice hit him with a rush of the Japanese rice he remembered, and Himawari noted the grains were bigger and different from the ones before. She snatched a bowl of rice, pulse racing as she geared up to taste the new flavor. While Masato warned it was still too early, his grin, though, showed he was just as hyped. He bolted to the factory to process the rice, every heartbeat a prayer for a perfect batch. Later he launched into cooking all 4 types of rice. Masato's grin said it all, the rice hit the mark, and the girls, buzzing to dig in, clamored which one they should try first. Masato dove headfirst into the first option. The taste slammed into him and a tidal wave of emotion swept through him. At last, the taste he'd hunted since his rebirth exploded across his tongue. Kimavari savored the Chuni's rice, chewing quietly as disbelief melted into delight. She couldn't believe how delicious it turned out. Masato's jaw dropped, the rice tasted miles better than before. It clung like glue, so he pushed for a version richer in amylose. I know, he swore, it was already exploding with flavor. I was itching to try other options. They dove headfirst into testing the other types. Every self-proclaimed one tasted irresistible. I know, anxiety leaned in and asked Masato which he liked more. He weighed every angle, held his breath, then slammed his choice, a Milo 17. They hail his palate as fit for the brand, and shout that it's as prized and exquisite as Kashi Hikari rice. Hinori and Silt demanded to know about Koshi Hikari, and Masato flicked his hand, declaring it useless. How could it matter if they knew nothing? He demanded she move every rice seedling to a Milo 17 for mass cultivation, and she vowed she'd see it done. Masato gaped as she channeled magic into the rice stalks. The former natural sciences student in him erupted with excitement at the wild possibilities of selection. His mind sparked with plans for crops, pest-proof strains and onions that never make you cry, breakthroughs that never existed in his old world. A bolt of inspiration slammed into him and he blurted it out. The frightened Jules cried, "What happened?" And Masato explained, "It just popped into my head." He dialed up the sumptuous ingredient he'd recalled. He pitched improving Matsutake, an outrageously pricey, ultra-rare mushroom prized for its explosive aroma and decadent flavor. And because it can't be farmed, its scarcity is legendary. Masato declared selective breeding can crank out mountains of Matsutake roof, and Vari's mouth watered at the thought of the endless delicious dishes that would follow. With the meal finished, the group surged outside. A grin split my face when I learned those mushrooms grew in the mountains. I hurtled into the peaks to find them myself. Masato remembered plunging into those mountains to forage for wild edibles, hunting every patch of green for a hidden Matsutake. Her enthusiasm flared like a beacon, and he knew we'd find it. Instead, the girl whipped the dining table into shape, snapping plates and silverware into place to eat again. Masato slammed a hand out and barked for them to calm down and clean up first, his gaze snapping to a tree looming nearby. His instincts screamed she was a Japanese red pine. He trained the microscope on the bark and watched layers of mycelium unfurl, weaving ghostly threads through the wood. They spring up only beneath those pines. He sparked alchemy, whipped up a tampon, plucked a small branch, declared that mycelium fused with pinewood would grow an improved Matsutake, and in the meantime asked the interested girls to clean up the bowls. At home, Masato slammed into his chair, powered up his laptop, and ripped open the genome editor. He blasted the Matsutake's genetic blueprint into the cloud and dove headfirst into the molecular machinery that harvests its nutrients. He zeroed in on checkboxes labeled saprophytic and mycorrhizal, spun to the baffled girls, and declared those were names for the mycelium of rare Matsutake. He announced mushrooms split into two camps: saprophytic fungi that gorge on decaying wood and leaves and can be cultivated. Mycorrhizals clamp onto the living roots of trees and ravenously siphon nutrients, wild and never cultivated. Mushrooms like microhizal, Matsutake especially, are notoriously stubborn to cultivate, so Masato pitched a radical plan to convert Matsutake into a saprophytic species and make it easy to farm. A cold dread slammed into me when I realized this would open the door to mass cultivation of Matsutake, and the Sylphies pressed Masato to trust them with the rest. Masato slammed the edited data into place, while Mud armored the mycelium. He catapulted the improved mycelium into the floating island's most powerful greenhouse, and blasted it with growth accelerators, making development rocket forward. He had to tear the mycelium apart and mold the spawn into convincing chunks of wood. Baffled, Kimavari blurted, "How does wood help mushrooms grow?" Masato tore away the veil and revealed how each branch of the Japanese red pine actually worked. He plunged it into the earth, drenched it with a growth accelerator, and blessed the rain clouds to compress 30 years of growth into a single instant. Instantly, the branch erupted, sprouting into a towering, unshakable tree. Masato willed 7 more logs into existence and pressed them together, shoulder to shoulder. He thundered that the mushroom-growing equipment was ready. Then they bored holes in the logs, pressed mycelium into every cavity, and stacked the logs into a precise, deliberate pattern. He sneered and branded the gathering a centipede. They called down rain laced with growth accelerators and mushrooms erupted. Mycelium burst into fruiting bodies that shot up from the logs one by one. And surrounded by that mushroom storm, I realized the sulfur beam had struck me. Masato barked for them to start harvesting at once, then told them to call him back after the harvest so he could bring the rain. 2 harvest cycles swept by. He amassed a monstrous stack of maths to pluck mushrooms for Hemwari. The haul looked like a buffet, totaling 276 mushrooms. Masato judged it more than enough for everyone. He blasted the girls with a heartfelt thank you for their help. Il, reveling at the dinner table, froze when Masato announced he'd have to wait for the food. He snatched up a humble charcoal grill and, channeling his super alchemy skills, forged it himself. He crafted pure, pitch-black charcoal and brewed frothing beer. Masato proved it using carbon wildest coal. He siphoned only the alcohol right out of beer all on his own. He unleashed a blast of fire magic and set the grill roaring with hungry flames. "Get the mats you're taking battle ready." He unleashed cleansing magic, blasting the dirt away and shearing off the stubborn, fibrous base of the stem. He sliced the mushroom cap, cleaved it in two, raked faint grooves across its crown, then dusted it with salt. Right in the middle of his interrogation, he slammed up a shimmering barrier, and I could tell it stunned the other man. He snapped, "Why?" A 5-layer barrier loomed over the mushrooms as they sizzled. Kimavari declared only Masada could conjure such magic. Doubt not at Masada, but the mushrooms, oozing juice, left her utterly spellbound. Minutes later the dishes sat ready, so mouth-watering even I couldn't look away. I knew he'd asked for something to eat. Masato urged them to wait, then broke down exactly how to savor them. He tore the mushroom along the previous cut and bit into it to show exactly how to eat it. He inhaled the steam and felt wonder explode inside him. The first bite made his eyes snap wide as the texture and flavor crashed over him, nearly forcing tears of joy. His glacial chewing set my teeth on edge. She flat out doubted it could taste that good. The moment the flavor hit her tongue, she blurted that it was staggeringly delicious, words failing her to pin down the taste. Masato fired off, fried 10 more mushrooms and served them with beer for dinner. And everyone whooped, their voices echoing into the night. The next day, Masada stormed back to the floating island to plant rice once more. Heavy-eyed and aching with sorrow, he cursed the pre-dawn toil in the rice paddies behind the house. Restlessness seized me and I babbled nonsense. Masato's steady voice sliced through it as he thanked them for joining us. He swore he'd grow a milast 17 rice the right way, and to have enough seeds he had to track down more seed tubers. His eyes lit. A bumper rice harvest meant they could cook up far more rice dishes. The girls snapped to attention, their anxiety melting away. Silt swore with burning resolve he'd do whatever it took. Masato, stunned by their sudden surge of energy, watched over the generous harvest. At the factory, he slammed rice into the grinder. The counter clicked to 6,003 grains, enough for about 1,500 plants, and Masato's jaw tightened when he realized they were still short on rice seeds. He rallied the girls, who used the plot as a nursery to sow extra seedlings and swell the harvest. On the floating island, he snapped an anti-physical barrier into place, molding the fields into a vast sealed box. He staked out this spot for rice seedlings, unleashed a water spell, and flooded it with water chilled to 10 degrees Celsius and laced with powder. After 10 days, he cranked the water up to 30 degrees and stared down 12 tense hours until marine germination burst to life. Anxiety knotted my throat as I pressed, "Will they sit in the usual spot?" And Masato replied, "This time it'll be different." He readied another field, showering it with specially treated soil so rice would spring to life. They scattered the seeds, and when a life-giving rain fell, bolstered by a tiny dose of growth stimulant, the rice shot up to 15 centimeters. Masato barked orders to the sulfur workers. Uproot the seedlings, bind them into tight bundles of 4, and replant them across the rice fields. Masato's skills snapped together into flawless harmony. They planted the rice. A merciful rain came unbidden, the growth stimulant kicked in, the grains swelled into golden heads and they reaped the crop. They cycled the process 2 more times, then the factory thresher tore through the batch. Masato counted over 960 million grains. Enough to sow 1,600 hectares, he declared. The next harvest will turn those fields into food. He snapped his fingers and motioned the girls to perk up. Masato suddenly cut in tired. They shot back, "I'm fine, I can keep going." He praised their resilience, then snapped a fierce warning, "Don't push yourselves past the breaking point." He burst back the next day and proclaimed it the last day to plant rice. He sparked a colossal arcane circle that blazed to life. He flipped most of the fields into shimmering rice paddies in an instant, roared for everyone to give every ounce of strength. They plunged into planting, and within minutes the stalks bowed heavy, ready for harvest. Masato swept his gaze across the fields and praised them for their tireless toil. They warned that a mountain of work loomed before the harvest. The dress ignited a daring idea. He slipped away without a sound, then cried out his name, panic cracking his voice. Masada, razor-focused, stayed stone silent. He thrust his hand skyward, unleashed his special skill, great architecture, and a towering building erupted into being in an instant. Tucked inside the girl's remains, that distinct structure screamed what it was meant to do. Masada bent spacetime like rubber and uncovered that the place was a roaring vehicle manufacturing plant. He either blew him away or filled him with dread as the car shot forward. In just a few minutes, the combine stood primed, raring to go. I asked, and Masato grinned as he revealed it, the iQuit machine, a device that harvests rice all by itself. The combine rumbled across the field on its own, and the girls gaped, utterly bewildered. At dawn, Masada slept like a rock until Himawari jolted him awake, and he shot upright, demanding, "What's going on?" Dread nodded my gut. Her mother wanted to visit her. Masada didn't oppose it, but his curiosity flared at her sudden interest. Himawari confessed her mother still pined for his cooking, replaying that special dinner in her head and begging for one more taste. She lunged to tell her mother right away, but Masato clamped a hand on her arm and barked, "Wait." then leaned to the window and contacted the warrior's mother through the glass. He sprang into action and sent her something the moment he heard she planned to come. He and Varia's mother stood baffled at first. Masato slammed his power into the Silpy, unleashing a flood of enhancement magic straight into her. A sudden surge of strength ripped through her, and Masato revealed it came from the last 4 hours and 30 minutes. His concern struck her like a warm hand on her shoulder. Masato shrugged it off, insisting it was no problem, and before anyone could blink, Himwari's mother declared she'd come. After the call, Sato declared it was time to prepare, and I couldn't help but blurt out, "What are you going to make?" Misada shot back with a grin, promising she could spin those generous ingredients into a whole feast of dishes. Her mother burst through the door, a mouth-watering aroma yanking her toward the kitchen, and Misada's eyes flashed. She'd arrived at the perfect moment. I plated steaming rice crowned with fragrant matsutake and set down a sizzling miso mayonnaise fry. Anna Worry's jaw dropped at the unfamiliar dish. They pressed around the table, gratitude bursting from every voice as they gave thanks. Masato sampled his creation and beamed. Mise Mayo amplified its pure sweetness. I kept my guard up, but the flavor won me over, and her mother nodded in agreement. Masada beamed at their praise and immediately insisted they try the fragrant matsutake rice. He declared they'd nailed it perfectly. Himewari praised how the mushroom and soy aroma soaked into every grain of rice. Her mother gasped, eyes wide with the same stunned admiration. I lean in and tell them Masato painstakingly handpicks the finest ingredients and hones every flavor to perfection. And her mother, seeing his effort, visibly softens. They kept chowing down, hanging on every word as Jamie Worry raved about Masato's talents. Meal over, Worry slammed into me. She laughed and confessed it was her first time trying those dishes, and she said they were unbelievably tasty. Her mother beamed. In the human world, the elite chefs were crowned royal chefs. She nudged Masato to take care of it, and he bowed out with a gentle, apologetic smile. He might be seething that his mother was mortified while his culinary skills were completely ignored. Masato declared he'd be overjoyed if Japanese cuisine caught on here so more people could try it. He vowed to master real chef skills so his dishes could reach as many hungry mouths as possible. He prayed someone would step up and help him pull it off. At the neighboring market, the seller's head snapped up as they spotted a girl drifting through the stalls. It hit him she couldn't tear herself away from her chef dream, and pity burned in his chest. That past failure stole her shot at becoming a professional. She lost her left arm, and her dreams exploded into a million jagged shards. The next day after lunch with his mother, Jamewary Masato stormed into the guild to turn his harvest into coin. An old, gray-haired appraiser stood watch at the guild's warehouse. Carol had caught wind that Masato had rolled in with fresh harvests and fragrant spices. Masato admitted he'd trapped them inside enchanted cards. Plants explode from the soil, popping up one by one. Guess what? Carrots loaded with ultra-beta-carotene actually smooth away wrinkles. Next, the special bulbs flared to life, supercharging immunity, obliterating bacteria and viruses, and purging poisons and curses. Tranquility Yams doesn't mean calm. It ignites seething anger, gnawing anxiety, and crushing stress. Holy Burdock slammed digestion into high gear and ignited fat burning, helping strip pounds away. Masato flashed a tarot that temporarily cranked every attribute up by 10, instantly supercharging both his physical and magical strength. Finally, his rice wine annihilated purines and unleashed harmless gas that sent his gout packing. Masato slammed a bottle of vinegar onto the table and announced it turbocharged HP and MP recovery 100 times. The old man's jaw dropped as he stared at the harvest and spices, their bounty so rich it felt unreal. He scoffed that tarot could ever pump up anyone's attributes. Masato shrugged the effects off as barely a blip. Carol's curiosity ignited for Yam, a method that erased negative feelings. Masato Mayas, a psychiatrist from his old world, would stand thunderstruck. He also demanded to know why the evaluation skill slapped such bizarre names onto the Yans and Morks. Masada grinned, declared he had one last thing to share, and held out the dish he'd prepared, urging them to taste it. Carol blinked, baffled he'd even bother cooking for himself. Masato shrugged, saying ingredients hide their true quality until the flame teases it out. He shoved the plate at them, daring them to taste it and declare whether it was good enough to sell. He slid a steaming mountain of matsutake fried rice across the table and slammed an amsa-based dish down beside it. He lifted a spoon, tasted the miso, and was moved to tears. The flavor was exquisite and it contained anti-cancer properties. Carol exploded with praise as the rice's satisfyingly chewy bite and bold mushroom flavor blew her away. Seeing them roar with approval, Masada grinned and unleashed even more. Carol flashed a grateful smile and thanked him for the food, while the old man stood breathless, marveling at how Masato had turned the harvest into a golden bounty. He kept proclaiming Masato the best farmer alive, and Masato's face burned as he begged him to knock it off. The old man kept insisting, disbelief burning in his eyes, that Masato had somehow grown over 100 rare matsutake mushrooms from a single log. They dared to defy nature's limits. Masato threw open the crates to reveal a towering mountain of his product, and Carol's eyes shot wide as she pressed him, worry sharp in her voice. You really intend to sell all of it? The old man slammed his fist down and commanded Carol to route every single sale through Cole. Carol swore she'd deliver every last thing the moment she stepped back through the door. Masato, struck by a sudden memory, shoved over more than 70 movement cards to Carol and relief surged through him at first. Carol lunged, snatching at the cards that cascaded from her fingers, as the old man growled that those things weren't to be trifled with. Palms sweating, Carol vowed to alert the staff immediately. Masato felt the urgency in her voice but couldn't imagine it happening that fast. The old man suddenly remembered Cole's magical tracker and Masato snapped, "Do you know where Cole is now?" Masato saw the guild drowning in clutter, leapt into action, and dealt out discard cards so everyone could jettison useless items in a heartbeat. Carol erupts with excitement, gushing through every thrilling detail of the sales update. They swore they'd sell it at lightning speed and report back the results. Masato thanked them. Before slipping away, he called out that he was already prepping the next batch of the harvest. The old man leaned in, eyes blazing as he envisioned Masato's next daring move, and Carol matched his thrill, anticipation crackling between them. Masato pressed them to stay in touch. He'd already locked in the next project. The next day, Masato and Himawari ventured into a brand new place, and Masato let out a grateful shout thanking her. Something yanked him straight into the towering sugar cane fields. A worried man pressed him about his goal, and Masato shot back that he wanted to craft another seasoning.